Chapter 1560. At least, the little palace maid would take care of him. Then Ning Juma's last trace of reason disappeared. He looked at Wei Wei Bai with a pale face, his eyelashes trembling violently. Then he saw the wound on Wei Wei Bai's head, and helplessly reached out to touch Wei Wei Bai's face. When he touched the blood, he finally couldn't take it anymore and his tears fell. Hurts, does it hurt? Ding, the male lead's favorability is 40. Wei Wei Bai. Wait, was the favorability 40 just now and not 10? Before Wei Wei Bai could think about it, Ning Juma's face was already covered in tears. As he cried, he suddenly vomited a mouthful of blood. When he was holding the crown prince tightly and kowtowing, he was injured by the palace servants. Now that he was filled with grief and anger, he finally vomited a mouthful of blood. When the other palace servants saw the master and servant, even if they had a heart of stone, they would feel tragic. One had a head full of blood, and the other was crying miserably. It was too tragic. Ning Wang had gone crazy, and only had a new palace made to serve him. The crown prince even led people to bully him. Look at how he was bullied. Although people's hearts were cold, they couldn't help but feel sad for the master and servant who were so miserable. In the end, the eunuch couldn't help but invite a good imperial physician for Ning Wang. He was afraid that Ning Wang would die when he returned to the palace. Wei Wei Bai originally suspected that Ning Jioma was pretending to be stupid, but seeing him like this, she thought deeply about her acting skills, and then looked at this little fool with snot and tears, crazy and miserable appearance. How could he pretend to be stupid like this? Impossible. Even she couldn't pretend, so no one could pretend like this. After all, there was a difference between a smart person pretending to be crazy and a real crazy person. There was a difference no matter how awesome they were. Especially the purity in their eyes, it couldn't be faked. A baby's bright eyes were almost impossible to see in the adult world. It couldn't be faked. Ning Juma's baby IQ eyes showed that he was really crazy, so the favorability of a crazy person was too hard to guess. Jumping up and down, she felt like she was about to have a heart attack. After returning to the cold palace, the imperial physician gave Ning Juma a checkup and left him some medicine. Ning Juma's wounds were all superficial and not serious. When the imperial physician saw that the palace was so shabby that there was only one palace maid, he did not know how to treat palace maids. After all, they were too lowly and not worth his time. But he didn't do anything. Instead, Prince Ning grabbed his sleeves tightly. He looked like he was going to die, and insisted that he treat him. The imperial physician had no other choice. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to leave this lousy cold palace. What's more, if the little palace maid really fell down, Prince Ning would go crazy. Then King Ning would be too miserable. The imperial physician reluctantly bandaged Wei Wei Bai's wound, and left after a few words of advice. Wei Wei Bai was calm, but Ning Juma shed tears when he saw her wound. Like a pitiful little puppy, his eyes were wet. Seeing this, Bai Weiwei wondered if she was acting too calm. Should she hug and cry with Ning Jioma to express the shabby and desolate atmosphere of the master and servant relationship? But with such a small wound on her forehead, Weiwei Bai really couldn't cry. She had died so many times that she was used to it. So Weiwei Bai pushed Ning Jioma onto the bed with all her might. Then, she brought hot water and sat by the bed to wash his face and hands. She braided her hair and wrapped the wound on her forehead with a white bandage. There was a faint smile on her cute and beautiful face. Chapter 1561. Your Highness, don't cry. The doctor said that you will recover soon. Ning Juma looked at her wound in confusion. There was a vicious fire in his heart, but he didn't know how to get rid of this feeling. He could only endure it. Weiwei Bai seemed to see his discomfort. She squatted by his feet and gently placed her hands on his legs. Ning Juma only felt a pair of soft hands pressing down on his thighs, making them feel numb. And just like that, Bai Weiwei gently, charmingly and cutely rested her chin on her hands. She raised her face and smiled. Your Highness, if you cry again, I will leave. Ning Wang suddenly froze. He blinked and suddenly said in a cold voice, No, I won't allow you to leave. This cold shout stunned him. He had never spoken like this before. But it also seemed to be his attitude. Weiwei Bai's smile deepened. Even a little fool would get angry. Her smile relaxed a lot. Her thin red lips curved slightly. Under the light, she was so beautiful that it made people's hearts palpitate. This was a beauty that had never been shown in front of others. Ning Jiuma stared blankly. He forgot everything in an instant. His eyes were filled with her soul-stirring smile. He only felt that he was sick. His heart was beating so fast that he couldn't bear it anymore. It was as if his heart was going to jump out. Ning Jiuma suddenly reached out and held her fingers tightly. "Away, away," he called out softly. He knew her name, but he had never called it before. Not even once. In the past, those palace servants also had names, but he couldn't remember them in his muddled mind. He remembered Wei Wei Bai's name for a long time, but he didn't know how to call it. Many times, he looked at her foolishly and wanted to call her name, but he didn't know why, but he couldn't call it out. Now his simple mind finally had an answer. When he called her, his heart would beat faster. If he fell sick too quickly, he wouldn't be able to stay by her side if he died of illness. The tip of Wei Wei Bai's ear was a little itchy, and so was her wrist. Strangely, Ning Jiuma held her fingertips. Why was her wrist itching? Wei Wei Bai didn't care about this strange feeling that flashed past her mind. She still asked curiously, "You called me away?" No one had ever called her that before. It was quite a fresh experience. Ning Jiuma was a little nervous. "My mother calls me Imo. You can call me that if you like." It was a simple explanation, but it was his true thoughts. A fool would not be able to conceal any of his thoughts. His innocence, sincerity, love, hate, and joy were all exposed without any concealment. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was not right of her to tempt a fool. She clearly intended to be an old maid. These were all professional habits that had to be changed. Wei Wei Bai immediately looked at Ning Jiuma lovingly. Then, she got up and patted his head. Ning Jiuma sat there in a daze. His fair cheeks were slightly flushed as he looked at her without moving. It was as if no matter how she treated him, he would obediently let her do whatever she wanted. Facing such a target, Bai Weiwei really couldn't come up with any schemes and tricks. But there was no need for any schemes against such a simple-minded Ning Jiuma. Weiwei Bai was about to turn around and leave after touching Jiuma. But one hand grabbed the corner of her clothes tightly. Weiwei Bai turned around and saw Ning Jiuma pursing his lips tightly. His brows were furrowed and his eyes were red. He looked like he was about to cry again. "Where are you going?" he asked with a trembling voice. Weiwei Bai was about to answer. Ning Jiuma's voice was soft and choked. "Don't leave me. Is at https://www.sashu.com//. Chapter 1562. Was she leaving? She was injured and he couldn't protect her, so she didn't want him anymore. Weiwei Bai turned back helplessly and revealed a gentle smile. "I'll warm up your food, Your Highness. I'm hungry too." Ning Jiuma was stunned. His fingers trembled, loosened and tightened, but in the end he suppressed his fear. He let go of her clothes. Weiwei Bai didn't say anything and walked away. Ning Jiuma grabbed the edge of the bed with both hands. His body was stiff as he sat there. When he saw Weiwei Bai come in with a stove with charcoal, she took out a cold food box and sat on the stool to warm up the rice. His entire body relaxed, and he almost couldn't maintain his sitting posture. Weiwei Bai had just put the 8 treasures rice into the pot on the stove to warm up. A pair of hands came from behind her and hugged her tightly. Weiwei Bai asked strangely, "Your Highness?" Ning Jiuma hugged her tightly. Her body was soft as if she could melt into his bones. Weiwei Bai coaxed him like a child. "Your Highness, why are you hugging me? Let go of me." Ning Jiuma was silent for a moment and said in a muffled voice, "I'm cold, Wei." He was lying again. He just wanted to hug her. She didn't leave him. How nice. Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 45. Weiwei Bai had a motherly smile on her face. The favorability was so obedient. Just like Ning Jiuma, she was obedient no matter how she coaxed her. Under the whiplash of favorability, Bai Weiwei happily accompanied Ning Jiuma until she coaxed him to bed. But when it came to sleeping, Ning Jiuma cheated her again. His clean and handsome face showed stubbornness. His fingers pulled Weiwei Bai's sleeve and didn't let go. "Wei, sleep with me." If it wasn't for fool Ning, she would have thought that he was going to do something. Weiwei Bai said without sincerity, "This is against the rules, Your Highness." Ning Jioma straightened his neck like a child asking for candy, and became willful. Wei doesn't need rules. Wei Bai had found a magic weapon to increase her favorability towards Ning Jioma. She only rejected him perfunctorily a few times, because of her image as a palace maid. Realizing that he really wouldn't let go, she resigned herself to her fate and said, "Your Highness was the one who wanted me to sleep with you. You can't suddenly think that I don't follow the rules and kick me off the bed." A trace of surprise flashed across Ning Jiuma's face. He immediately retreated to the back of the bed, leaving more than half of the bed for Wei Bai to sleep on. Then he pushed the blanket to Wei Bai. It was as if he was afraid that she would catch a cold. Wei had a clear conscience. She calmly pulled the quilt over and covered herself. Then she turned around and saw Ning Jiuma curled up in the innermost part of the bed. How could a man take up so little space to sleep? Wei Bai reached out and grabbed his arm forcefully, pulling him into her embrace. "Your Highness, you'll catch a cold if you're too far away." Ning Jiuma's face was flushed to his ears. His body stiffened, and he didn't dare to move, but he felt happy. Wei Bai was a little tired. She patted Ning Jiuma's back. "Your Highness, do you like this place?" She kissed him softly. Her eyelids started to fight. Ning Jiuma was silent for a while before shaking his head. "I don't like it. But if you're here, I'll like it." Before he could say this, Wei Bai said lazily, "Then, Your Highness, shall we leave the palace? I'll take you to the ends of the world to eat candied haws." The last sentence was purely to coax a child. This palace wasn't suitable for fools. Ning Jiuma looked at Wei Bai's half-closed eyes. Her pink lips were like petals as she said something he had never heard before. He didn't know why, but his eyes turned red. He replied foolishly, "I'll follow you wherever you go." Wei Bai wasn't surprised when she heard this. Her breathing gradually stabilized. Ning Jiuma looked at her for a long time, before realizing that she had fallen asleep. He curled up beside Wei Bai happily. His Awe looked good no matter how he looked at her. Then he slowly fell asleep too. In the middle of the night, Ning Jiuma opened his eyes fiercely. His gaze was ruthless and dark. There wasn't a trace of innocence in them. He stared at Wei Bai, who was sleeping soundly, and held it in for a long time. Then he gritted his teeth. The words in his mouth were cold and ruthless. "How dare you try to abduct me to elope with you?" She actually coveted him, touched him, and even wanted to abduct him. She even climbed into his bed. To get him, she didn't want to be reserved at all. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1563. Ning Jiumo raised his leg, wanting to kick this audacious palace maid off the bed. But just as he raised his leg, Wei Bai turned over and habitually raised her leg to clamp Ning Jiuma's leg. She hugged him like she was hugging a bear doll. Ning Jiuma's body was as stiff as a rock. Wei Bai had a good sleep quality and didn't complain. Instead, she rubbed her face against his chest, and then fell asleep with steady breathing. Her action was purely the posture of hugging a teddy bear to sleep. Ning Jiuma stiffened his neck, his body stiff and his face as black as the bottom of a pot. How should he kick her? No, he should lift her up and throw her into the well to drown her. She didn't respect him at all. She casually climbed into his bed, and even wanted to abduct him out of the palace. Didn't she know that he was a prince? Even if he was stupid, she couldn't treat him like this. Who gave her the guts? Ning Jiuma thought viciously and angrily, but his fingers gently held the sachet under her nose. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Even pigs didn't sleep as well as her. How could she sleep so well? He had used this thing to knock her out so many times, but she didn't even notice that something was wrong. He didn't know how she was raised. Was she raised in a pigsty? Ning Jiuma thought maliciously, but he was very careful when he got up. He was like a cat, as if he was afraid of being discovered. He even felt that something was wrong with Wei Bai's breathing. He had to be stiff for a long time before he got off the bed shakily. When he got off the bed, he pulled the blanket over Wei Bai and covered her. This action was too natural. It was so natural that he only realized what was wrong with it in hindsight. He was a prince, and he was covering a palace made with a blanket? He couldn't control himself, but he wasn't crazy now. Or was he still half crazy and he just didn't realize it? Ning Juma's face was dark as he walked to the window with his hair hanging loose. That trusted eunuch was still obediently hiding under the window. How is the crown prince? Ning Juma opened the window halfway, his tone extremely cold. The eunuch. The poison acted up and the wound is too serious. He is being rescued. Ning Juma. Where's the empress? The eunuch said. The empress is keeping watch. Your Highness, we have to be careful. The empress has already given you a death order. The empress's orders couldn't be overt. After all, even if the emperor didn't care, he couldn't let the empress give the order to kill the prince. Wasn't this a blatant slap to the emperor's face? Even if Ning Juma's death wasn't regrettable, he couldn't lose face. But if he was secretly killed by the empress, in that case, the emperor would not pursue the matter. As long as he could fool the emperor, it would be fine. This imperial palace was full of vicious people. From the emperor to the eunuchs and palace maids. They were all selfish to the core. Ning Juma leaned against the window and looked up at the woman on the bed. She seemed to have been sent to his side not long after she entered the palace. Therefore, her words and actions were considered vulgar in the eyes of the people in the palace. And this vulgarity and unruly casualness was completely different from the puppets in the palace. Ning Juma didn't know if he liked this kind of casualness. He had never seen a trace of respect for a superior in her eyes. If he was normal, he would hate this kind of disrespectful behavior. But when he was crazy, he seemed to like it very much. Ning Juma's mind was a little heavy. Today's scenes rushed through his mind. If she hadn't said that she would take him out of the palace, he wouldn't have known that this little palace maid was so bold. Chapter 1564. Ning Juma even wondered if she was one of the empress people. She was here to make him leave the palace and then murder him. But when he thought about how she almost crippled the crown prince with her strength, she definitely wasn't one of the empress people, because the empress saw the crown prince as her only hope. Wasn't she committing suicide by touching the crown prince? The eunuch reported that the crown prince's injuries were very serious. What was more serious was that the poison in his body had started to act up violently. This was the key to leading the crown prince to his death. Ning Juma's lips were a little pale. He took a few deep breaths before saying, "Once the empress makes a move here, the first to suffer should be the people around me." She would remove the people around him one by one. Then she would attack him. This was the old woman's usual method. And the only person he could see around him now was Wei Bai. The eunuch said carefully, "Your Highness, should we drive her away? After all, it would be a life-and-death struggle." Wei Bai was obviously not used to the harem, and might be easily killed. Drive her away. Ning Juma's eyes were in a daze and he felt panic. Drive her away to where? She even had the thought of eloping with him. Once she was driven away, she might run out of the palace herself. Ning Juma couldn't help but ask, "Have you found out the person behind this palace, maid?" The eunuch said, "No, Your Highness. There is really nothing suspicious about her background. We have checked repeatedly. The only person she has served is you." Ning Juma actually felt that Wei Bai didn't seem like a spy from any palace with her personality. Other than being a little stronger, she didn't have any concept of hierarchy. Wei Bai's actions were just to take care of him. The eunuch started to come up with a plan. Put her in the cleaning room. This position is inconspicuous and won't be targeted. After all, Wei Bai was the servant who treated Ning Juma the best for so many years. The eunuch was also grateful. Every time he came, he saw that His Highness was clean and full. He felt that this palace maid was good. Therefore, when the battle was about to begin, taking her out of the picture was a thank you gift. Ning Juma's lips and tongue were dry. He also knew that if they fought, Wei Bai could die at any moment. But when he thought of her leaving, he might not be able to find her in the future. The familiar unwillingness in Ning Juma's heart appeared again. He didn't even know what he was thinking, so he couldn't help but blurt it out. "Let her stay here." His words were spoken so urgently that even the eunuch was a little puzzled. Ning Juma's face immediately darkened. He pinched his palm with his fingers, afraid that someone would see through the evil thoughts in his heart. He immediately said, "She can be a shield. If the Empress's people come to assassinate her, she can block them." It was such a vicious statement. He said it so casually, but this was his style. Ning Jiuma even added, "She's strong and can do many things." After he finished, he suddenly shut his mouth. This was simply a case of revealing 300 taels of silver here. The eunuch couldn't help but ask, "Is your highness reluctant to let this palace maid leave?" It was so obvious that even the eunuch could see that he couldn't bear to let her go. Ning Jiuma held his breath and sneered, "She's just an insignificant little stone for me to climb up. Why should I waste my time on her? Whether she dies or not, it's her fate. Why should I deliberately transfer her away?" These words were truly heartless and heartless. Chapter 1565. Why did he think that he would have a few children in the future? The system cut the red string and gritted its teeth. Why did this red string become thicker? What kind of material did that third-rate fortune teller use? It was already more than half done, but for some reason, it became thicker again. It heard the favorability notification. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 20. The system raised its eyebrows. It couldn't be that the deeper the favorability, the thicker it would be? And because of the deeper reason of plundering luck, once they transmigrated to another plane, the male lead would have a layer of vigilance and killing intent towards the host. This killing intent would affect the host's identity, causing her to have enmity with the male lead in many planes. But in this plane, it was very smooth and peaceful. Even the male lead's kindness towards the host was more than in any other plane. Was it because of the red string? The system was silent for a long time. If it wasn't for the red string, it really didn't want to destroy it. But when it returned to reality, the red string was too much of a hindrance. It was accidentally entangled by the red string. It and the host might fall into a turbulent flow of uncontrollable turbulence, never to be able to turn over. It was said that third-rate fortune tellers had a lot of side effects. The system had no choice but to silently take out a chainsaw. If scissors didn't work, then try a saw. After Ning Jiuma's mind became confused, he woke up in the middle of the night and saw the quilt in the middle. He stared blankly for a while, then reached out to move the quilt away and crawled into bed. Then he reached out and gently hugged Wei Wei Bai. Her fragrant scent and soft body made him excited for a long time. Excited, he fell asleep. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 50. System. This is the standard way of increasing the favorability of a lunatic. It's really spicy. Bai Weiwei was very happy. She didn't know anything about the little schemes of the red string madness and Ning Jingyiamo. She couldn't be blamed for using the holiday mentality, because Ning Jiuma was too easy to coax cheat. When she first saw this little retard, she couldn't help but want to return the goods. But now, and it's so fragrant. Wei Weibai felt that in less than a year, she didn't need to do anything. Half a year was enough. 100 favorable impression points were waiting for her not far away. Wei Weibai carried the food box, stepped on wooden clogs, and held an umbrella in her hand as she walked towards Ningguang Palace. The weather in this plain was really like 8 to 10 days of rain. Before he could return to the palace, the system was sitting on a chainsaw, eating potato chips as it said. A few palace maids came to the palace, they just left. Wei Weibai. What did they do? Rape Ning Jiuma? Ever since the crown prince had been confined, the palace had suddenly become quiet. Wei Weibai's keen intuition told her that this was the calm before the storm. In the past few days, she had been thinking about how to leave the palace. He had to ask for a map from the system. What was more troublesome was if he didn't have a plan for leaving the palace. Even if they managed to escape, they might be caught and brought back. Therefore, Wei Weibai was still thinking about the route after leaving the palace. The system said, "I think it's some pastries for him." Wei Weibai's face immediately turned cold. Pastries? Could it be poison? If Ning Jiuma was poisoned to death, she would hang the empress and dismember her. In this harem, the empress was the one who had the most malicious intentions towards Ning Jiuma. Who asked the crown prince to be so pitiful? Bai Weiwei hurried into the house and saw Ning Jiuma obediently holding a green pastry and eating it. She immediately rushed over and knocked the pastry out of his hand. How can you eat something given by others? Wei Weibai had taught him not to eat anything given by anyone other than her. Chapter 1566. Ning Jiuma's eyes were soft and confused. He seemed a little shy. Those sisters said that these were made by Wei and are very delicious. Wei Bai. No, she couldn't make such beautiful pastries. Moreover, the pastries she made could kill people without poison. Before Wei Bai could urge Ning Juma to vomit, the system said, "There are many guards and maids outside, surrounding the door." Wei Bai's eyes narrowed, and her face turned cold. "They're surrounding? System Wei Bai. They're waiting for the poison to act up." Wei Bai had already figured out the other party's plan. They definitely wanted to poison Ning Jioma. And then she would be the murderer. This way, the victim and the murderer would be complete. What a vicious and convenient method. Wei Bai. Ning Jioma won't be poisoned to death, right? The system was about to answer. Ning Jiuma's fingers gently pinched Wei Bai's fingers. Wei Bai turned around in confusion. She saw Ning Jiuma's face was flushed, and his beautiful eyes were wet. "Wei, I feel uncomfortable." When Wei saw him like this, a bad premonition surfaced in her heart. Sure enough, Ning Jiuma's thin lips trembled, and his voice trembled. Very uncomfortable. Of course, she knew that he was uncomfortable. He was so close to her. She could clearly feel his physical condition. So that group of people didn't feed Ning Jiuma poison. It was an aphrodisiac. Afraid that she guessed wrong, Wei Bai's mouth twitched and asked the system, "This drug, it's used to lift people's spirits?" System. It's not only lifted, it's very strongly lifted. 7 times a night with this thing will do. Of course, the male lead will eat less, at most 3 times. Wei Bai's head hurt. So the person who poisoned him wanted to remove Ning Jiuma's first time? So kind? Ning Jiuma was a prince, even if he was caught red-handed. As long as it was not a concubine in the harem, it should be fine. The system flipped through the information. It's like this. The male lead is engaged to the only daughter of the current prime minister. Originally, the empress wanted to kill Ning Jiuma directly, but to make the prime minister stand in the power here, she agreed to their request and tarnished Ning Jiuma's reputation. So the emperor personally issued a decree to cancel the engagement. Ning Jiuma's crazy reputation had long been ruined. But for the sake of the prime minister's reputation, he couldn't just rescind it. After all, once the seal was lifted, wouldn't it mean that he despised King Ning? The prime minister was so fond of his reputation that he could not bear such a stain. Therefore, before killing Ning Jiuma, it was enough to pin the crime of promiscuity on him. It didn't have to be a concubine, a palace maid would do too. Wei Bai thought about it and sneered. It's disgusting to see such a vicious person's heart. She pulled Ning Jiuma up. "Your Highness, come with me. Let's move first. It's not safe here at all." Ning Jiuma looked at her in a daze. His body began to tremble, and he felt his mouth dry up. His skin was about to catch fire. And he didn't dare to say that he felt that Wei Bai's fingers were very cold and soft. He wanted to hug her. Wei Bai was about to go through the small door when the system informed her that there were people blocking the way. Wei Bai rolled up her sleeves and saw a wooden stick behind the door. She would smash a few heads first. Escaping was not a problem. She was about to pick up the stick. Ning Jiuma's body trembled, and his eyes burned with pain. He couldn't take it anymore. He suddenly hugged Wei Bai. "Wei, I'm hot, you. You what? Is that https://www.sashu.com?" Chapter 1567. Ning Jiuma was at a loss for a moment. He finally remembered some fragments. It seemed to be a fight between demons, a red candle, and a red wedding dress. Or someone said it before. If they wanted to be naked, they had to get married. Get married. Ning Jiuma suddenly had an idea. Yes, if they got married, Wei would be his. He didn't have to worry about Wei not wanting him anymore. Ning Jiuma grabbed Wei Bai's hand tightly and said anxiously, "Wei, I have something for you." Wei Bai was very strong. But Ning Jiuma's strength was also shockingly strong due to the drug. He dragged Wei Bai to a shelf and placed a dusty bottle close to it. Ning Jiuma opened the bottle, and a secret door suddenly opened. Ning Jiuma carried Wei Bai and entered the secret door. The door immediately closed and turned into a wall like before. Wei Bai was blinded by the mountain of gold and silver treasures. Ning Jiuma said eagerly, "Wei, do you like it?" They said that this is for me to marry my wife, and they're all for you. Wei Wei Bai. She didn't know that there was so much wealth hidden in this cold palace. The system didn't remind her. Ning Juma thought that she was unwilling, and he was anxious. A voice in his heart told him that no one was allowed to enter this place, but Ah Wei was different. Ning Juma was so hot that he was about to cry. In the end, he could only open his wet eyes and look at Wei Wei Bai with reddened eyes. I feel uncomfortable, he said softly without any attack power. The drug was clearly tormenting him. He should have been crazier and directly pounced over to hug Ah Wei. But Ning Juma didn't dare. He was afraid that Ah Wei would dislike him, and that she would be angry. So Ning Juma could only stand foolishly in the middle of the gold and silver. He clutched his robe tightly with both hands and muttered, I feel uncomfortable. This sad little pitiful. Wei Wei Bai looked at her hand that rolled up her sleeves. She had no choice but to use her hand to help him feel comfortable. In the end, the system said faintly, this medicine is poisonous. Wei Wei Bai. Of course it's poisonous. Without poison, how can it seduce other people's bodies? The system replied, no, what I mean is, this thing needs to be dispelled by real hands. Wei Wei Bai. How did they come up with this Xuanhuan medicine? The system said, why don't you buy a substitute sticker that costs 100 for each use? Wei Wei Bai. Even if you spend 100 yuan on this, are you sure Ning Juma can handle it himself? Without anyone to guide him, he might not even know where to go. This was such a shameless conversation. Su Tong and Demas were very calm. The system said, then I'll leave you to it. I'll go get some chips and look at the bullet screen. After that, the system fell silent. Wei Wei Bai turned around and saw that Ning Juma had already taken off his clothes. His fair, slender, and weak body was covered in sweat and flushed from passion. He stood in place, his body naked, his long hair draped over his shoulders, his innocent eyes, thin red lips. Half of his face was like a devil's, the other half was like an angel's. At this moment, it was so exquisite that it was strange. There was a magical charm to it. His breath was hot, and his eyes finally started to show a hint of red aggression. Ah Wei, I want it. He didn't even know what he wanted, but his bones were roaring. He wanted Ah Wei. Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a few seconds, then finally reached out and pulled out the hairpin in her hair. Her long hair spread out. She reached out her delicate fingers and gently touched his sweaty chest. Then, her voice became soft and sweet. Your Highness, don't eat random things next time. You always make me worry. There was a hint of disdain in her words, but it was more of doting. Then, Wei Wei Bai raised her head and kissed the dazed and excited Ning Juma. She wanted to be an old maid. She wanted to be a vixen. Chapter 1568. But that was when he was in a delirious state. When he recalled it, he was only angry and irritable. He could suppress those charming feelings. But once he was sober and experienced it personally, his mind went blank. Wei Wei Bai helped the dazed Ning Juma put on his clothes. Then she turned around and reached out to pick up her clothes. She wore a pink palace dress and a pink tube top. Her back was thin and white, and the pink clothes slowly covered her body. It covered her slender and beautiful body. She suddenly turned around gently, pursing her bright red lips, and revealing a joyful smile. Your Highness, Mother once told me that a woman's body is very important. Other than her husband, no one can touch it. Her eyebrows relaxed as she said this, full of tenderness. Ning Juma was still leaning on the gold, silver, and jewelry in a daze, his eyes almost unable to leave her body. Her smile gradually made him regain his senses, although he was very angry about this. But it seemed that the woman was the one who was at a disadvantage. This was her first time. The image of her lying on top of him uncomfortably flashed through his mind. Ning Juma's eyelashes trembled. So although he was at a disadvantage, she was also at a disadvantage. It wasn't a crime worthy of death. After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she looked at him softly, and then turned back. Your Highness, when we leave the palace in the future, I will take care of you for the rest of your life. Ning Juma stared at her in a daze. Shouldn't the first thing she did when she woke up be to plunder the wealth here? Could it be that she wasn't moved at all by this gold, silver, and jewelry? Wei Wei Bai suddenly said softly, "Your Highness, the belt is with you. Give it to me." She finished dressing and turned to look at him. Before Ning Jiuma could react, his hand had already taken the belt and placed it in her palm. Wei Wei Bai's fingers suddenly clenched, and she pulled him into her arms. Her kiss gently landed on his ear. Then a soft whisper fell into his ears. "Thank you, husband." Ning Jiuma's body trembled and his hand followed suit, holding her fingers tightly. His heartstrings were stirred. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 30. Wei Wei Bai, who was still trying her best to comfort the little fool over the pain of losing her virginity. She was stunned. 30. Isn't it 50? Why was it 30? Could it be that little fool felt uncomfortable, so her favorability dropped just like that? Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth. This crazy increase in favorability, it really made her experience useless. She suddenly heard Ning Jiuma's weak voice. "Ah Wei, do you like these jewelry?" Wei Wei Bai felt vexed. What was so good about jewelry? This was the first time she had sold her body to the point of losing favorable impression points. Selling her body to increase her favorability by 5 or 10 points was already a lot. In the end, his favorability dropped by 20 points. Bai Weiwei felt disheartened. Had she lost her attractiveness? Was it because her face and body were no longer good? "Away!" Ning Jiuma shouted in a silly tone. But his eyes were suppressing a bit of a poisonous snake's probing. Wei Wei Bai held his hand and calmly said, "I don't like it. Your Highness, I like you. I like your favorability." She had completely lost her temper with this retard's favorability now. It would go up and down every day. She could almost imagine the future when the favorability reached 99 points. She thought that it would reach 100 points. But when it collapsed, the favorability was at 50 points. When it collapsed again, the favorability was at 0 points. Clap, clap, clap. What a wonderful increase in favorability. This body was really not worth it. Chapter 1569. Wei Wei Bai decided that in the future, the little fool would come up with some XX medicine to say that he was uncomfortable. She would throw him into the well and soak him in it. He wanted to go to bed. "Dream on." Wei Wei Bai pulled Ning Jiuma and was about to go out. They had been here for so long and had put on their clothes. The system had reported it when it came back. The people outside couldn't find the two of them and had already retreated. The Prime Minister was so angry that he was stomping his feet, thinking that the mission had failed. But Ning Jiuma pinched her fingers tightly. He seemed to be unwilling to give up. "You really don't like it?" Wei Wei Bai was still sad that she had sold herself for the first time and had lost favorability. To prevent the little fool from nagging, she fell back. Ning Jiuma instinctively reached out and hugged her waist. Wei Wei Bai leaned on him softly, frowning and her face pale. "Your Highness, I'm tired." Ning Jiuma asked, "Tired?" Then he suddenly thought of something and was at a loss. Wei Wei Bai was very unhappy and leaned on him, saying lazily, "I can't move. My waist and legs are sore." Ning Jiuma's face turned red, and a large red color dyed the back of his neck. He felt his face become hot and flustered. How could she be so bold? Wei Wei Bai reached out and hugged his neck, jumping on him. Ning Jiuma could only immediately reach out and hug her, afraid that she would fall. She nestled in his arms at ease. "I haven't showered yet." Ning Jiuma stuttered. "Bob 8th. This woman actually disregarded the hierarchy to this extent? Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and yawned. I have all your things on me." Ning Jiuma almost fell. How could she say such things? Where was the shame? Ning Jiuma held back his anger. "You," Wei Wei Bai's voice was seductive. She faintly nodded, as if she was puzzled by his change in attitude. Ning Jiuma paused. He didn't know why he didn't want her to know that his mind was clear. So he gritted his teeth and pretended to be slow as he said, "Oh Wei, I don't know how to shower." "Wei Wei Bai. It's okay, I'll teach you." Ning Jiuma knew how to take a shower. During this period of time, she had been the one to carry the water while he bathed himself. However, he probably wouldn't help others bathe. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai did not suspect anything. Ning Jiuma finally staggered 2 steps. Wei Wei Bai was confused. What's wrong? Afraid that she would get suspicious, Ning Jiuma could only soften his tone. "My waist hurts." This reason was very reasonable. Wei Bai smiled. Your Highness, your body is not good. You need to exercise more in the future. Ningjuma. A mouthful of blood was stuck in Ningjuma's throat. He originally wanted to kill her. But she was strong. He was capable of poisoning. The poison might not be able to kill her immediately. It would alert the enemy. He still had a trusted aide that he could use. But it was not worth it to expose his confidence. Ningjuma thought about it. Suddenly, there was only one thought in his mind, which was that he did not want to kill Wei Bai. His mind was in a mess. If she was even the slightest bit tempted by wealth, he would have already done it. But why was she different from others? She was good to him, and was not afraid that he would be stupid. Without a future, she even risked her life to bring him out of the palace. Was it really possible to love someone to the point of disregarding everything else? Ningjuma was confused. They walked out, and there was indeed no one outside. It was already late at night. Wei Bai did not really let him help her bathe. She was very strong, and went to carry the water to boil the water herself. The shower was in a small room beside the house. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1570. Ningjuma watched her leave and sat on the bed in a daze. No one knew what he was thinking. Suddenly, he walked to the window and opened it. The eunuch squatted under the window. Your Highness, are you all right today? He must have heard about the Empress's opportunity. Ningjuma sneered. What can happen? That old man, the Prime Minister, made a move. To protect his reputation, he sacrificed me. The eunuch hesitated for a moment before saying, Your Highness, the Taoist priest you arranged has entered the palace, and is favored by His Majesty. The current emperor was obsessed with the art of alchemy and immortality. Ningjuma had arranged for the immortal Taoist priest for more than 5 years. This Taoist priest was definitely the best chess piece to kill the emperor. Ningjuma said word by word, Tell that Taoist priest not to expose himself, and not to rush in rashly. Listen to my arrangements. He had to deal with the empress first before it was the emperor's turn. He had to get back all these people who owed him. No one should think of escaping. Ningjuma's heart was filled with blood. He clasped his fingers on the windowsill, his expression cold and fierce. He was like an evil spirit that made one's back numb. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. His violent expression twitched, and a trace of helplessness flashed across his face. Get lost, he whispered to the eunuch squatting by the window. Then he closed the window. Ningjuma jumped onto the bed as fast as he could, and pulled the blanket over himself. Wei Bai came in with a bucket of water. She had just finished bathing, and was wearing a thin light green dress. He usually saw her in palace dresses and rarely saw her wearing other clothes. Ningjuma couldn't help but take a few more glances at her. Under the weak candlelight, her delicate and graceful figure swayed under the shadow. Wei Bai came to his side. She was wearing a light green dress, and was as beautiful as a night flower. Her satin black hair was draped over her back with water vapor. She was a beauty that couldn't be seen normally. She didn't hold back and bloomed for him. Ningjuma pursed his lips and looked away, but her hand suddenly grabbed his ankle. Then she put his foot in the hot water. Ningjuma was stunned, and looked at her with dark eyes. However, he saw her sitting on a small stool, and slowly using her fingers to tuck her messy hair behind her ears. Then, she completely pushed his feet into the water. Are you comfortable, Your Highness? Wei Bai asked softly without looking at him. Her lowered eyes made her look indescribably delicate and charming. Ningjuma pretended to be stupid, and didn't dare to say too much. In fact, it was inappropriate to say anything. Wei Bai didn't mind that he was in a daze. The little fool was often in a daze, and this wasn't the first time. She continued, In the future, when we leave the palace, we will find a bustling town and hide in it. Then no one will be able to find us. He had already thought of a route, and a place to go after leaving the palace. The system's map was very detailed. He had already gone through all the arrangements after leaving the palace. If they were to start escaping, these plans would come in handy. It was too dangerous for Ningjuma to stay in the palace. The crown prince was injured, and the empress would definitely come out to take revenge. Ningjuma didn't have anything he wanted. In this palace, his mother didn't dote on him, and his father didn't love him. He lived miserably until she was the only palace made by his side. If they wanted to kill him, it wouldn't be easy. Before she came, even the palace maids and eunuchs bullied him. If this was a palace drama, and he didn't leave the palace, he would probably be drowned in the water in less than half an episode. She didn't want Ning Jiuma to die in the palace drama before the strategy was completed. Chapter 1571. If it wasn't for the fact that she only had 1 year to complete the mission, she wouldn't have minded bringing Fool Ning along to fight in the palace. But time was too short, and she was too lazy to waste time. Ning Jiuma's eyes changed a few times, dark and hesitant. Finally, he tried to speak, suppressing the darkness in his voice and bringing out a hint of clumsy doubt. "We have to leave the palace, do we have to?" His tone was like that of an immature child asking why. It even had a hint of not wanting to leave the palace. Wei Weibai had nothing to hide from him. After all, it was too complicated for him to understand. So Wei Weibai said straightforwardly, "Yes, because if we don't leave, I can't protect you. I want to protect you from harm." Ning Jiuma didn't expect her to be so straightforward. She wanted to protect him from harm. This reason made him dazed for a while. It had been too long since he heard this sentence. Ever since his mother's death, no one in the cold imperial palace had ever said those words to him again. These words stung him, making his eyes dry. Wei Weibai washed his feet, took a clean towel, and began to wipe his feet. While wiping, she said, "This palace will eat people. Your Highness, you are still innocent and don't know how to avoid it. I can't always watch over you. If one day you are taken away by a wolf, where can I find you?" After saying this, she paused for a moment before looking up at Ning Jiuma. Her tone carried a sigh and was incomparably worried. "So don't make me worry, Your Highness. Nothing can happen to you." She had never had any hierarchy. In fact, she had always been casual and bold towards him. She treated him as if she really treated him as a family member. Ning Jiuma had never felt the feelings of a family member. But if he did, it might be the feeling Wei Weibai gave him at this moment. Ning Jiuma's breathing deepened. He wanted to laugh at her naivety. He wouldn't leave this place, and he wouldn't be eaten by others. He was the one who ate people, and he wouldn't like her. His ambition was very high, and his status was also very high. He didn't want a little palace maid. Even if he wanted one, he wouldn't be as unreserved as she was. He should have killed her. The more people who died in this lousy cold palace, the safer he would be. His cold rationality told him this, but he didn't know why. But the sourness in his heart surged up one by one. Her words were meant for a fool like him. If he wasn't an idiot, would she not like him anymore? After Wei Weibai finished washing his feet, she covered him with a quilt and pushed him onto the bed. "Sleep, Your Highness." After saying that, she was also tired. She had been tormented to death today. The most important thing was that her favorable impression of him had dropped. Was it because her skills were so bad that the little fool couldn't enjoy it at all? Bai Weiwei hadn't taken more than a few steps when his hand was already firmly gripping her sleeve. Little fool's hesitant voice came from behind. "You come up and sleep." Weiwei Bai didn't argue anymore. The big bed was very comfortable, so she turned around and threw herself onto the bed, directly onto Ning Jiuma. Ning Jiuma's body stiffened. Weiwei Bai laid on top of him and kissed the corner of his mouth. "Good night, Your Highness." After saying that, she flipped onto the bed, pulled the quilt over herself, and went to sleep. She was too lazy to play around with the strategy. She would continue tomorrow. Ning Jiuma stared at the top of the bed. After a while, he heard the sound of her sleeping breathing. Only then did he say those words in a low and hoarse voice. "How dare you, you are too presumptuous." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 35. Chapter 1572. Ning Jiuma woke up and found Weiwei Bai in his arms. Images that he had never experienced before flashed through his mind. He blushed and carefully pulled up the blanket to cover her with more blankets. Awei's body was so beautiful. Ning Jiuma looked at her in a daze. Her hair was beautiful too. Her fingers were beautiful too. She was beautiful when she slept, and she was beautiful when she woke up. Suddenly, He felt that Awei was beautiful everywhere. When Ning Jioma saw the first glimmer of light in the sky, his head felt heavy, but he was very excited. He slowly got up and smiled at her. Then he went out. Awei was tired, so he took over her work. He also knew how to boil water, and he also knew how to get food. Although Ning Jioma was clumsy and muddle-headed, he didn't know why. Ever since he met Wei Bai, he had become more and more obedient. His mind seemed to be much clearer than before. If she improved a little every day, she might be able to catch up with Wei Bai one day. Ning Jioma cheered himself on, and then happily went out the door. The notification of favorability also rang out. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. The system said, "Ha, this is the feline disease's favorability increase." It opened its celestial eye and planned to follow the retarded male lead. After all, the male lead had many enemies now. If he wasn't careful, he would be gone. At that time, he would have to go and rescue them. It would be too troublesome. All of a sudden, the system heard the familiar ding sound of downloads reaching 100. Then came the side quest notification. Host, I have a little secret. A beautiful little secret, a cute little secret, ah. The side quest was stuck, and let out an indescribable scream. Wei Bai was so frightened that she sat up straight. Her hair was messy and she had panda eyes. What's wrong? Then she heard a side quest. Host, please find out the male lead's little secret within 3 days. If you fail, the host will go crazy together with the system. Wei Bai. What kind of secret was that? What do you mean by crazy together? The system explained. It's just that the male lead has a little secret. He needs you to complete the side mission within 3 days. If you can't complete it, the two of us will go crazy together. Wei Bai said. Is he the same as retard Ning? The system said. If we're not as cute as him, we'll turn into those annoying retards who only know how to chuckle when they eat. Wei Bai was so scared that her back went numb. All the tiredness she had from fighting with Ning Jioma was gone. Where's that idiot Ning? The system immediately went to find the male lead. I brought you some food, but I met his fiancée on the way. Wei Bai searched for information. It was the Prime Minister's daughter. When Consort Ro was young, she was favored. When the family was still doing well, Ning Jioma was the crown prince. Therefore, the Prime Minister betrothed his only daughter to Ning Jioma. But after Ning Jioma was crippled and went crazy, the Prime Minister didn't mention it again, because the Empress wanted to deal with Ning Jioma. Only then did the Prime Minister remember that the engagement had not been annulled. Maybe yesterday's drug plan didn't work. Today, he sent his daughter to test the waters. Wei Bai put on her clothes and wooden clogs. She grabbed an umbrella and walked out. Ning Jioma carried the food box in a daze. A few girls stopped him and didn't let him leave. He protected the food box helplessly. He didn't understand what the woman in front of him wanted to do. The woman in front of him was wearing a white dress and a white gauze hat. Her face was faintly discernible under the hat. A maid held an umbrella to block the rain. Chapter 1573. Ning Jioma was surrounded by several maids as he stood alone in the rain. The lunchbox was wet, and Ning Jioma used his robe to cover it. He was afraid that Wei Bai would wake up and see that the food was wet and couldn't eat it. Your Highness, my daughter earnestly requests Your Highness to cancel our engagement. Ning Jioma's face was blank. Who was this? What engagement? When the woman in white saw his silly appearance, she was even more determined to break off this wrong marriage. How could she marry a fool? Her future was so bright that even the crown prince wanted to take her as his legal wife. How could she waste her life on an ugly fool like Ning Jioma? Looking at the scar on Ning Jioma's face, the woman frowned and disdain flashed in her eyes. Your Highness, why don't you give the handprint on this paper to His Majesty and ask him to cancel the engagement? A maid handed over a piece of paper. Ning Jioma felt that these people were very strange, and he took a few steps back. The woman in white thought that he didn't want to cancel the engagement, and was a little annoyed. Your Highness, do you love me so much that you're not willing to let go even at this point? Ning Jioma finally heard something that he could understand. His eyelashes trembled and his eyes were soaked in the rain, looking exceptionally clear and beautiful. No, I don't love you. The woman in white curled her lips, but she didn't believe this sentence. She touched her hair confidently and said coldly, "Your Highness, you said this because you know that you're not worthy of me. If you really like me that much, then let me be. It's impossible for us to be together in this lifetime." Ning Jiuma had a headache when he heard this long paragraph, and could only choose what he could understand. If it wasn't for this period of time, he would have sobered up. He didn't even understand what love was. So he stammered, You're so ugly, I hate it." He said so with all his heart. The women and men here were all ugly. He didn't like them. The woman in white's smile froze. She was famous for her beauty. If it wasn't for the fact that the emperor was too old, she wouldn't be much worse than those favored concubines. But today, there was an ugly fool who dared to dislike her? The woman in white pointed stiffly. Someone chop off his finger and press the handprint. On that paper, it was written about Ning Jiuma's promiscuous harem, forcing the palace maids, and a series of false atrocities. Once he pressed the handprint, he would definitely die. Who didn't know that Ning Jiuma was dead? Therefore, it was just a formality to pin a crime on him. If the crown prince wasn't injured and angered the empress, this trashes as fools would be a joke. Now that he had offended the crown prince and the empress, he wouldn't be able to live for more than a few days. The woman in white couldn't wait to sever all ties with this fool. This marriage was a disgrace to her. Ning Jiuma hugged the food box. When those maids tried to pull his hand, he couldn't avoid them at all. Because if he dodged, the food in the box would fall out. What did Bai Weiwei eat after falling out? It was his first time getting food, so he couldn't drop it. Otherwise, Wei would feel that he was even more useless. A maid pulled out a dagger. The cold blade shone with a sharp white light in the rain. No matter how stupid Ning Jiuma was, he felt that something was wrong. His expression changed and he turned to leave. The woman in white said coldly, "Don't let him run away. We have to solve this matter today. Don't waste any more time." Chapter 1574. If this matter was successful, she had officially entered the Empress's eyes. Her future marriage would definitely be the best if the Empress approved. By then, everyone would be envious of her. A satisfied smile appeared on the woman in white's face. Those maids rushed over. One of them held a dagger, and had already ruthlessly chopped at Ning Jiuma's fingers. Ning Jiuma hurriedly protected the food box. What if the food spilled? That dagger was already close to his palm. Not to mention his fingers, even his palm would be chopped off. Suddenly, a stick fiercely and neatly knocked down the wrist of the maid holding the dagger. The sound of bones breaking was hair-raising. The maid let out a scream. She was in so much pain that she rolled on the ground and couldn't get up. The woman in white was shocked and immediately looked up. She saw an oil paper umbrella splashing down from the rain. Under the umbrella, a delicate and slender figure stood gracefully in the rain. Half of her face was exposed from under the umbrella. Her white skin was like snow and her lips were bright. She was as delicate and beautiful as a begonia flower. The woman in white thought that her appearance was outstanding. She actually saw another woman with better appearance than her. Then, the woman in white suddenly saw that delicate woman, who could be blown away by a gust of wind. She was actually holding a wooden stick in her hand. Weiwei Bai held the umbrella, and the wooden stick in her hand. Her face was cold. "Your Highness, the rain is heavy. This servant is here to pick you up." She usually didn't call herself a servant. Today, in front of others, she gave Ning Jiuma enough face. Ning Jiuma didn't know what face was. His eyes turned red and he looked pitiful. "Away, the food is spilled." The dishes were all moved, and a few dishes were spilled out. Ning Jiuma hugged the food box and stood in the cold wind and rain. He was so miserable that he looked like a little beggar begging for food. It was indescribably pitiful. Weiwei Bai slowly walked over. The maids were frightened by her neat stick, and took a few steps back. People who were used to being a tyrant were the most timid. This was a strange scene. A delicate girl was holding an oil paper umbrella, and strolling through the rain. She clearly had a damned graceful and fragile appearance. However, she was holding a fire stick in her hand, emitting a murderous aura. Weiwei Bai came in front of Ning Jiuma, and raised her umbrella to cover his head. Ning Jiuma's eyelashes trembled. He hugged the food box and refused to let go. He seemed to know that he had done something wrong, and didn't dare to look at her. Weiwei Bai sighed. Without this servant, your highness will be bullied again. Only then did Ning Juma feel wronged. He pursed his thin lips and said softly, "Away, I don't like them. They're fierce." Wei Wei Bai nodded in understanding. "Yes, your highness, don't be afraid. We are fiercer than them." With that said, Wei Wei Bai asked Ning Juma to hold the umbrella. Then, she rolled up her sleeves, and the delicate look on her face changed. She held the fire stick, and revealed a polite and kind smile. "I didn't know that there was a guest. I didn't treat you well. I didn't treat you well." With that said, she was very calm and ruthless. She knocked the head of the servant closest to her. She still held back, otherwise her head might have cracked. The girl in white's face was pale. "What are you doing? My father is the Prime Minister. Do you want to die?" Bai Weiwei walked all the way over. Like a watermelon, she knocked the maids until they lay on the ground, dripping with blood. She glanced at the girl in white who was holding the bloody fire stick, and smiled in a friendly manner. "So it's a distinguished guest. Then I'll treat you well." Chapter 1575. The maids she had served before were all lying on the ground bleeding. She didn't know if they were still alive. The woman in white's legs went soft, and she immediately turned to run. Behind her, Bai Weiwei's eyes were quick, and she grabbed her hat. The hat was thrown away, and the woman in white revealed a pitiful appearance. Her eyes were filled with tears of fear. Don't come over." The woman was so scared that she kept retreating. She didn't have the arrogant look of an evil person just now. On the contrary, Wei Wei Bai was holding a weapon, and looked more like a homicidal maniac. Wei Wei Bai then remembered that this little bitch was Ning Juma's fiancé. She looked at Ning Juma very gently. "Your Highness, this is your fiancé. Do you need to let her go?" Ning Juma was dazed for a moment. His pure big eyes blinked, and suddenly showed a trace of panic. "I didn't know she harmed me away." "Wei Wei Bai?" ? Ning Juma's face was already pale. He tried to explain. "She's ugly. She's a bad person, she harmed me." Was he going to teach his fiancé a lesson? Wei Wei Bai just thought this when Ning Juma rushed over. His face was red, and his thin lips were trembling. He was full of anxiety, and finally squeezed out a sentence. My wife is you. She's talking nonsense. How could someone be so bad? He already had a wife. How could others harm him? What if Ah Wei misunderstood that he was looking for another wife? She wouldn't want him. Thinking of this, Ning Wang was about to cry. His face scrunched up in grievance and tears rolled in his eyes. Wei Wei Bai. Although it was a sweet sentence, the favorability had dropped so much. Her heart didn't waver. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 70. Wei Wei Bai. 70? Because she was asleep. She didn't hear the favorability increase from 30 to 35, and then from 35 to 65 magically. So Wei Wei Bai heard that it was 70. It was the scene of 30 jumping off a cliff to 70, and sitting on a rocket. She completely lost her temper. This lunatic, retard, and sick person's favorable impression of him increased. She really couldn't bring herself to be happy. Therefore Wei Wei Bai replied calmly and gently, "Yes, your highness, I understand." With that, she picked up the fire stick, and was about to deal with Ning Juma's fiancé. In the end, he discovered that the woman in white had run away extremely quickly. There was no trace of her. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was a pity. She threw away the fire stick, and revealed a delicate smile. "Your highness, I'm hungry. Let's return to the palace." Ning Juma hugged the food box, and was in a daze for a moment, before he finally realized that she wasn't angry. He immediately revealed a silly smile, and passed the umbrella over her head. "Okay, Wei." With that, he held her hand, and happily returned to the palace. Although some of the food was spilled, there was still a lot of it. Wei Wei Bai was very calm. She calmly accompanied Ning Juma to eat dinner. Then she packed a package. There were several sets of clothes in the package. There was also some gold and silver from Ning Juma's secret room. In the eyes of the people in the palace, these gold and silver were not much. Not much at all. But it was enough for Bai Weiwei. Moreover, she had already planned out Ning Juma's future life for him. The system said that the supermarket had recently discounted a kind of intelligence-increasing drink. She asked the system to buy it and store it first. After a year, she would leave and give it to Fool Ning. That was because he wasn't a fool. He wouldn't starve to death by himself. As for Fool Ning's secret, although it was only 3 days, Wei Wei Bai felt that it wouldn't be too late to ask him after they left the palace. Bai Weiwei was the type to do what she said. She pulled the adorable Ning Jiuma and went straight to the cold palace. In the cold palace, the system found a dog hole. After going through the dog hole, there was a secret passage left behind in the past. They could leave the palace by following the secret passage. It sounded simple because of the system's cheat. Those who didn't know this place, even the emperor, wouldn't be able to find it. She had sent the prime minister's daughter away so quickly because she knew that she could leave immediately. Otherwise, the prime minister's daughter would bring a large group of people to settle the score later. Her life was about to be lost. Who asked her to be a little palace maid in this world? She secretly brought Ning Jiuma to the depths of the cold palace. Wei Wei Bai dug out the dog hole from a pile of miscellaneous things. Fortunately, she and Ning Jiuma were thin and could squeeze through. Wei Wei Bai squatted down and observed the dog hole. "Your Highness, you crawl in first later." Behind her, Ning Jiuma's voice came softly. "Do you want to elope with me so badly?" Wei Wei Bai struggled to push aside the miscellaneous things in the dog hole and answered casually, "If we don't elope, do you want to wait for your fiancé to come knocking on our door? She's bad and fierce. She's not good enough for you. Don't think about it." Her words were purely to comfort Fool Ning, who knew if Fool Ning would suddenly think that the woman in white was very beautiful and change his mind and not leave the palace. But after saying that, Wei Wei Bai frowned. What the hell? Since when did idiot Ning speak so clearly and methodically? Behind her, his calm but oppressive voice came again. "So are you jealous?" Wei Wei Bai realized that something was wrong. Just as she was about to turn around, a brocade handkerchief covered her mouth and nose. The fragrance rushed into her nose and she lost all her strength. The man behind her sighed and said, "Reckless and presumptuous. How can a woman like you be good enough for me?" Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 40. Chapter 1576. 70-40? Wei Wei Bai's eyes rolled back, and she fainted from anger. Then her delicate body was lifted up by him. In the dark cold palace, a eunuch walked over and picked up the bundle. Then he said in a low voice, "Your Highness, there isn't much." She didn't take much. "It's just your living expenses." Until the last moment, she was testing if this little palace maid was greedy. In the end, she risked her life and wasn't afraid of death. She just wanted to kidnap Ning Jiuma. She wasn't moved by that huge amount of wealth at all. Ning Jiuma lowered his head and saw Wei Wei Bai leaning softly against his chest with her eyes closed. She looked indescribably delicate, but he knew how strong she was. She had dealt with those palace maids just now. She really didn't want to live anymore. A little palace maid had offended the prime minister and the empress. How could she live? At least she was smart enough to run with him. Unfortunately, his fingers gently caressed her pale face as he lowered his eyes to hide the darkness in them. Unfortunately, he couldn't leave this place, and she could only stay here, unable to go to the bustling town outside the palace that she had mentioned. Ning Jiuma hugged Wei Wei Bai and looked coldly at the eunuch. The eunuch said respectfully, "Those palace maids have been killed and cleaned up." Chen Zili also fell into the water when she ran out of the palace. She was frightened and lost part of her memory. Chen Zili was that woman in white. She was also the prime minister's only daughter and had a marriage contract with him. Of course, this marriage contract was used to humiliate him and bring him danger. Nothing was of use. The so-called memory loss was just a forced removal of memories by drugging her. Ning Jiuma carried her out of the cold palace slowly and said to the eunuch, "She dug this dog hole." The eunuch said in a low voice, "Your Highness, we have already sent someone to take a look." Ning Jiuma said, "If it really leads to the outside of the palace, then block it first. Block this hole for me too. Don't let anyone find out." Everyone was well aware of the value of a secret passage leading to the outside of the palace. No wonder she kept saying that she wanted to take him away from here. He thought she was just stupid and didn't know how tight the security here was. With such a passageway, she could go anywhere. The eunuch opened an umbrella to cover the two of them and followed behind. Your Highness, we are too eye-catching. If they returned to the Ningguang Palace in such a grandiose manner, they would definitely not be seen by others. Ning Juma glanced at the eunuch indifferently. Go back to the Crown Prince's side and increase the dosage of the poison. Make him completely insane. The eunuch's body trembled, and a trace of astonishment finally appeared in his calm eyes. Your Highness, it's too early. It was supposed to be the Empress and the forces of the imperial harem fighting to the death. Only then did His Highness begin to intervene. And the antidote hadn't been found yet. He could go crazy at any time. So now was not the best time to participate in the battle. If the Crown Prince became a fool, wouldn't the Empress go crazy and investigate the source of the poison in the Crown Prince? At that time, Ning Juma might be implicated. Ning Juma's features were picturesque, but there was violence in his eyes. I can't bear it. It was a simple sentence that should be filled with sadness. But he said it like a cold blade, making people's backs numb. The eunuch stopped in his tracks and sighed faintly. Then this servant will arrange it. Immediately arrange for the Taoist priest. The army outside the palace also needs to step up their training, and buy the best weapons. Chapter 1577. There was no need to worry about money. When Consort Ro died, a large amount of her family's wealth was missing, and this wealth was in Ning Juma's hands. If it wasn't for the fact that Ning Juma couldn't find the antidote, he would be half crazy and half stupid. They wouldn't be bullied to this extent, and not dare to say anything. To make everything go smoothly, they made Ning Juma lead such a miserable life. In the 2 to 3 months since Weiwei Bai, the little palace maid came, his master lived like a human. If he hadn't offended the Prime Minister today, he would know that the Empress planned to kill. Weiwei Bai even planned to escape with Ning Juma. They would probably endure it. After all, which one of the imperial harem was easy to get along with? They were all man-eating jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards. Now that all the plans were brought forward, it would be much harder. As the eunuch thought about it, his eyes turned cold. So what if it was hard? It was better to take a gamble than to fall into a desperate situation again. Ning Juma's eyes were cold and emotionless. He said, "You go first, I'll take her back." The eunuch couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, how are you going to deal with this palace maid? Would he be afraid that the plan would be exposed and directly kill her?" Ning Juma paused and was silent for a moment before looking back at him coldly. That gaze was as cold as ice. The eunuch immediately lowered his head and didn't dare to ask again. Ning Juma said, "Let the people at the stargazing observatory submit the letter of auspicious star, and then let the Taoist priest present me as an auspicious sign." The eunuch said, "It's too risky." This plan was too risky. If the emperor didn't believe it, he would kill Ning Juma. Ning Juma smiled coldly. "I know that old man who is afraid of death too well. His body is about to collapse. Didn't the Imperial Hospital send news that he vomited several mouthfuls of blood a few days ago when he woke up? The Imperial doctors couldn't do anything. He was so afraid that he even killed a few palace maids. This kind of cowardly, cold-hearted and selfish person. He really wanted to be an auspicious sign. As long as he could give the emperor a glimmer of hope of eternal life, then that old man would be willing to believe anything." Ning Juma's eyes turned sinister when he thought of the emperor. How disgusting. The medicine given by the Taoist priest recently should be able to control my father's illness. He will definitely believe the Taoist priest's words. Coupled with the auspicious signs of the stars, he will definitely believe it. He wanted to become an auspicious sign, the hope of the emperor's longevity. Then, he returned to the imperial court as Prince Ning, who had regained consciousness. The eunuch replied, "Your illness." Ning Juma's face was still dark, but for some reason, there was a hint of gentleness in his eyes. He said softly, "With her around when I go crazy she can calm me down." When he was crazy, he would listen to her. This was a huge weakness for Ning Juma, but this weakness could be exploited. Ning Juma turned around. "You go first. I'll take her back." He clearly remembered how much he listened to her when he was a fool. All he had to do was tell her that when he was crazy, he had to pretend to be sober to fool people. Then he could hide this weakness of his insanity. Because when he felt that he was going crazy, His mind was also gradually becoming clear. Even if she couldn't act like a normal person, as long as Wei Wei Bai kept reminding and guiding her, it was still possible for him to maintain the facade of a normal person. As long as she was willing, she would be willing. Ning Juma took her back to the dilapidated palace and put her on the bed. At https://www.sashu.com/read at https://www.sashu.com read at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1578. Then he sat by the bed and looked at her expressionlessly, waiting for her to wake up. He shouldn't have started his plan so early. The antidote was still his obstacle. But when she took him out of the palace, his first reaction wasn't to kill her. Instead, he wanted to kill Chen Zili and the maids to prevent the prime minister from taking revenge on the little maid. And by doing so, he forced himself to the point where he couldn't survive without fighting in the palace. Ning Juma looked at Wei Wei Bai in a daze. He was awake more and more often. During the day, he would wake up from time to time. Not to mention at night, he was awake the whole night. The medicine seemed to be weakening, but he knew that as long as he couldn't find the antidote, it was not impossible for him to go completely insane when the effects of the drug came back one day. After all, he had studied this medicine for a while. If he found out that there was no antidote, many people would die. Even if they didn't die, they would go crazy in the end without a trace of consciousness. Ning Jiuma thought about how he might go completely crazy in the future and frowned in annoyance. Back then, the one who poisoned him and his mother was the Empress. But he had been a spy around the Empress for so many years, but he had never seen the Empress with the antidote. Even the Empress didn't use the same poison to kill people. This poison was so effective, but the Empress had never used it a second time. So he asked someone to poison the Crown Prince. Today, the Empress should find out that the poison in the Crown Prince was the same as his. As long as she took out the antidote and saved the Crown Prince, he could get the antidote. Ning Juma thought coldly. In the dark shadow, his face didn't have a trace of innocence. It was full of scheming and sinister coldness. Half of his face was disfigured, making him look more like a demon. Suddenly he seemed to have noticed something. His eyelashes moved and his eyes trembled. Then he met a pair of clear eyes. Wei Wei Bai didn't know when she woke up. She stared at him blankly for a while. Tongzi, I didn't expect Ning Jiuma to be transmigrated. The system, no. Wei Wei Bai was deep in thought. Rebirth. The system, no. Wei Wei Bai. Playing dumb. Without waiting for the system to say anything, she denied it again. It's not that real. Then, did he suddenly become clear-headed? The system continued, keep guessing. We're very close to the side quest. Wei Wei Bai and the system tried their best to guess the side quests. Ning Jiuma saw that she was silent for a long time, and thought that she was frightened. He reached out as if he wanted to touch her. But in the next moment, Wei Wei Bai's eyes were clear and alert. She reached out and grabbed his wrist, coldly saying each word. Who are you? These words were steady and heavy. There was even a hint of killing intent. It seemed that to her, he was not Ning Jiuma, but an imposter. She was just a little palace maid who had no respect for her superiors. She even felt that he wasn't Ning Jiuma, and even had killing intent. Ning Jiuma didn't know why, but when he saw the unfamiliar and cold emotions in her eyes, he became annoyed and flung her hand away. What's wrong? You don't kneel and salute your master when you see him. Instead, you have a cold face. What kind of servant are you? As soon as he said this, Wei Wei Bai's pupils shrank. She jumped up and threw herself at Ning Jiuma. She was so strong that she flipped Ning Jiuma over on the bed. The bed fell to the ground. Wei Wei Bai sat on Ning Jiuma's body and reached out to rub his face. Tell me, who are you? How dare you pretend to be my King Ning? Where did you hide my King Ning, you assassin? Chapter 1579. She grabbed his neck with one hand and used the other hand to pinch his face with all her might. This disguise mask is really good. If you don't return His Highness today, this old lady will make you die without a burial place. Ning Jioma had imagined thousands of images of her waking up. Seeing him become smart and sober up, she would definitely be frightened and then moved. Then, she would be even more devoted to him. Even if he was stupid, she would like him so much. If he wasn't stupid, wouldn't she love him so much that she would go crazy? But what was going on? She was actually suppressing him? Ning Jioma said in a muffled voice. Impudent, let me go. I am Ning Jioma. Wei Wei Bai was incomparably cold. You bastard, His Highness isn't as repulsive as you. He is such a pure and cute person. How can he look like you? After saying that, she pulled out the hairpin in her hair and pointed it at his neck. Speak, where did you hide him? If you don't speak, I will skin you. Ning Jiuma's body stiffened as he looked at her in disbelief. Wasn't she very gentle? Every time he woke up and thought about it, she would treat him so gently. Even when she spoke to him, she didn't raise her voice. Even if there was no difference in status, he felt that this little palace maid was still delicate and cute. But once she felt that he wasn't Ning Jiuma, why was she like a bandit? Ning Jiuma was frightened, but he couldn't break free from her hand. She was strong enough to strangle a pig to death. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes, and the hairpin was about to pierce his neck. Ning Jiuma's expression suddenly changed, and a trace of fear appeared in his eyes. He looked at her blankly. Away. He seemed to have just woken up and didn't know what happened. Why did Awei want to kill him? Wei Wei Bai. A trace of confusion flashed across her face. It seemed that Ning Jiuma's sudden change made her very uncomfortable. Ning Jiuma asked stupidly. Awei, did I do something wrong? You want to hit me? The hairpin in her hand touched his neck. The cold pain made him feel innocent and sad. Wei Wei Bai's hand trembled, and she immediately threw the hairpin away. She immediately reached out to touch his neck, her eyes red. Your Highness, are you all right? You were possessed by a wandering ghost just now. I've already scared it away. You're finally back. She cried as she spoke. Her delicate and cute face was filled with fear after despair. It was as though she was in so much pain that she wished she was dead now, that he was no longer an idiot. Ning Jiuma's eyes were clear and cold. He suddenly realized that Wei Wei Bai had always liked him. Could it be that he was stupid? Was that why she had such a huge reaction when he woke up? The system was dumbfounded. Host, what are you doing now? Wei Wei Bai cried and said. I have to put on an act to let him know that my feelings are loyal. If I change my attitude when he changes his personality, wouldn't that be flip-flopping? Moreover, she liked Fu Ning. She finally saw through it. Ning Songming's favorability was only 40. Fu Ning's favorability was 70. Fu Ning's favorability was so high. Ning Jiuma saw her lowering her body and crying. She was clearly worried about him. But he was getting more and more irritated. He even hated her attitude. Why did she like him when he was stupid? If he wasn't stupid, she would kill him? So the person she liked was actually a fool? Ning Jiuma's teeth were about to bleed when he thought of this. Suddenly, he frowned and his brain started to hurt. The poison was acting up again. His hand clutched Wei Wei Bai's clothes tightly. A trace of unwillingness flashed past his eyes. Awei, why is your interest so unique? He didn't like the smart one, but she liked the stupid one. There was something wrong with her brain too. Ning Jiuma was filled with anger and unwillingness. He finally couldn't take it anymore. He closed his eyes and his eyelashes trembled. Ding, the male lead's favorability is 70. Wei Wei Bai and the system understood. Ning Jiuma was stupid again. //. Chapter 1580. Wei Wei Bai had probably guessed the side mission. So after Ning Jiuma was poisoned, the poison didn't turn him into a complete idiot. Instead, it turned him into a half-idiot. And he would occasionally come back to life? System. He comes back to life every day, you just don't know. It listened to the male lead every day, and his favorability jumped up and down. It couldn't remind the host who slept like Zhu Beiji that the target's favorability jumped off a cliff again. Wei Wei Bai looked at Ning Jiuma who was lying flat. He seemed to be struggling with something. His beautiful brows were furrowed, and sweat appeared on his forehead. He reached out as if he wanted to grab something. Wei Wei Bai calmly reached out her hand. Ning Jiuma held her hand tightly. His eyelashes were sweaty, and he finally opened his eyes, looking at her with his beautiful wet eyes. Away! Wei Wei Bai's face was filled with hesitation and doubt, but more than that, she felt heartache. What's wrong, Your Highness? Ning Juma looked at her blankly, then suddenly got up and hugged her. He rested his head on her shoulder and rubbed his face against her neck, almost crying. I dreamed that you didn't want me. The doubt in Wei Wei Bai's eyes didn't disappear, but it didn't stop her from comforting him softly. Your Highness, how could I not want you? The bad guys took you away. You're safe now, it's okay. Wei Wei Bai had some guesses in her heart. When Ning Jiuma was stupid, he didn't remember that he was smart. But the smart Ning Jiuma probably remembered him when he was a fool. So now when she was going to attack Ning Jiuma, she had to consider whether Ning Songming could see it. The fear in Ning Jiuma's eyes slowly faded. Her soft and warm body dispersed the uneasiness in his heart. Aren't we leaving? Wei Wei Bai frowned. She was very patient. The weather is bad. We have to leave in a few days. Her words made Ning Jiuma smile through his tears. Awei, you're so nice. He foolishly thought that Awei was really nice. Wei Wei Bai released him and stared at him blankly for a while before reaching out to touch his face. Your Highness, your face is dirty. Let me get some water to wash your face. Ning Jiuma immediately nodded like a chicken pecking rice. When he was in a daze, he was really obedient. More importantly, her favorable impression of him was at 70. Bai Weiwei even considered whether or not to give him more poison, so that he would become a complete fool. This way, that eyesore Ning Shirsi wouldn't have to come out. The system seemed to have seen through Weiwei Bai's evil thoughts. It felt that its host was becoming more and more like a villain. What was going on? Idiot Ning, bah. I'm saying that although the male lead is easier to capture if he's an idiot, the male lead has a destiny line. If you poison him, you'll be struck by lightning. Wei Wei Bai said indifferently, you're lying. Yes, it was a lie. The male lead did indeed have the Fate King Dao line. Anyone who tried to forcefully change it would die. Only Wei Wei Bai was fine no matter how she changed it. If she really poisoned Ning Jiuma, the lightning wouldn't strike her. Because every time Yi Yushuan's Fate King Dao line was destroyed by Wei Wei Bai, a good heaven's pride met Wei Wei Bai. He became the heaven's bane every time. If he was struck by lightning every time, it and its host would become a power plant. Wei Wei Bai saw the system's worry. Don't worry, I won't poison you. Am I the kind of person who would do anything for favorability in your eyes? Chapter 1581. System. It was true. Wei Wei Bai was also embarrassed for a while before forcibly changing the topic. Isn't the side mission supposed to be completed? Why aren't you saying anything? The system heard it and agreed. Wasn't the side mission supposed to be completed? Why aren't you saying anything? The system turned its head and saw the 7 words hanging on the side quest in bright red. Download failed, please refresh. What the hell? It was the system's first time seeing a side mission stuck, and had to be refreshed before it could be activated. The system said, it seems to be stuck. I will refresh and the mission will be reactivated. Then it will tell you that the side mission has been completed. Ning Juma's secret. It must be completed. So the system and the host were very calm, and pretended to be cool as they waited for the refresh result. Refresh successful. Ding, side mission cleared. Download again. This time, the system was more careful, and waited until the download was 100% complete before it pressed confirm. Then the side mission was successfully activated. Dear, you have successfully activated the side mission of this plane. The system nodded to the host, and was ready to accept the joy of completing the mission. I want to fight in the cold wind and rain. I want to fight in the warm spring. I want to fight in the dream of a golden millet. Congratulations to the host for activating the side mission of Palace Intrigue. Please successfully fight for the position of Empress and motherly model of the world. The system in Wei Wei Bai. Mission time, lifetime. The main mission only had a year's time. What was the use of a lifetime for the side mission? It had to be solved within a year. Before Wei Wei Bai could complain, the punishment came. Side mission failed. Please experience the scene of a eunuch with the system 100 times. Eunuch with the eunuch. The system trembled and immediately covered its lower part. Wei Wei Bai was confused. What the hell? Isn't the side mission completed? The system immediately flipped through the information and then said as if it was struck by lightning. It's like this. The side mission we downloaded earlier seemed to be stuck. So after refreshing it, it changed. Yes, it was like when we refreshed the page. It was too long ago. The content of the page might have changed when we refreshed it. The side mission was the same. Because it had been too long. The new side quests were overwritten by the old ones as soon as they refreshed. Weiwei said, "No, I've completed my mission." The system replied, "It's gone." The old quest was gone. So it was useless to complete it. Because someone new had arrived. Weiwei felt like she was about to vomit blood. She clutched her heart and leaned against the wall. In other words, I still have to complete a side mission? The system covered its pants and trembled. If we don't complete it, we'll become eunuchs. Weiwei said, "This punishment doesn't seem that bad." Compared to mental retardation, he was crazy. Cutting off the eunuch's power was a piece of cake. Because she had nothing to cut off at all. The system replied, "Hee, you'll grow them back." Weiwei. The system said, "The punishment scene is very realistic. It's to punish you. If you don't have a little penis, then I'll let you grow one first. Then, I'll do it 100 times. Weiwei. It was better to be crazy. This side mission was so crazy that it suddenly crossed the line of human morality. Growing a penis 100 times, and then doing it 100 times was terrifying. Weiwei said, "Be the empress? You want me to attack Ningjiuma's father while attacking Ningjiuma?" Download the https://m sashu.com button at the bottom to record your reading record. You'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 1582. When the side mission was released. Wasn't she embarrassed? Such a heavy and ethical side mission. Shouldn't it be blocked? The system flipped through the information. You just need to be the empress for a day. Weiwei said, "How can I become the empress in a year's time? Just tell me if you want to punish me." Even if she was a fairy, she couldn't do such a thing. The system said, "Isn't the main point? Do you still want to woo the male lead?" Why did the host accept the father-son strategy so easily? Shouldn't she struggle a little? Ding! The system has sent a Children's Day gift. Do you accept? Children's Day came after the New Year. The system's programs were strangely smooth. The system said, "Most of the gifts are lollipops or balloons. They're not useful or harmful." It was used to celebrating holidays in the system's world. Weiwei was a little curious. She accepted the gift. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining the Palace Intrigue gift pack. You are a beauty that can cause the downfall of a city or an emperor. To any emperor, you are the white moonlight, the cinnabar mole, the cute little sweetheart, and the peerless beauty in their hearts. Gift name, Emperor's Love. Weiwei and the system were speechless. They suddenly felt that the side mission was very simple. Weiwei said, "Once I get Ningjiuma's favorability to 100, I'll use this to fool the old emperor. I'll be the empress for a day, and the mission will be complete." With the gift, it was easy to fool the emperor. She didn't even need to woo the emperor, or get too close to him. Just a smile could solve the side mission. Otherwise, she would rather get rid of 100 times because the emperor was too ugly. He was already in his 50s. She didn't want to see such an old target. The system was silent for a long time. Well, once the gift is opened, it can't be put back. So don't let the emperor see it. He'll feel like he found the love of his life when he sees you. The system's gift was very effective. Weiwei leaned against the wall and was silent for a long time before she said, "Forget it. I'll hide in this cold palace and get Ningjiuma's favorability to 100. Everything else was empty. 100 favorable impression points was the most important. Weiwei immediately rubbed her face and got to work. When she returned with the water, she saw Ningjiuma sitting on the bed, hugging his bent legs and looking down with his innocent eyes. He pursed his lips, and his eyes were hazy with depression. Suddenly, he looked up and saw her, and his eyes lit up. "Wei, you're back." Ningjiuma hurriedly got off the bed and ran to her barefooted. He laughed like a silly boy. When Weiwei saw that his favorable impression of her was 70, she felt assured and helped him wash his face, hands, and feet. Being a perfect mother was the most suitable for a little fool. As expected, the uneasiness in Ning Juma's heart disappeared. He obediently and happily followed her arrangements. There was only one thought in his mind. It was good that Awei did not abandon him. His Awei was the best. Today was a very relaxing day. Wei Bai didn't give fool Ning any pressure, but she would occasionally look at him with a sad and puzzled look. Before going to bed, Wei Bai took a stack of red bean cakes. The sticky red bean paste was very sweet in the mouth. Ning Juma ate a piece. Suddenly, he reached out and stuffed a piece into Wei Bai's mouth. Wei ate too. His fingers brushed against her lips. It was softer and sweeter than the red bean paste. Chapter 1583. Ning Fu didn't know why, but those happy and intense scenes flashed through his mind. Awei's beautiful skin was dyed red, just like a flower in the rain. The bright red color was very beautiful. Wei Bai naturally ate the red bean cake, the tip of her tongue licking the sweetness on her lips. There was a touch of red. It was actually much more delicious than the red bean paste. Ning Juma's face was red. His breathing was a little rushed as he lowered his head. He helplessly grabbed his clothes, feeling that he was starting to feel strange again. He secretly glanced at Wei Bai. Wei Bai also looked up at him, the two of them meeting eyes. Wei Bai smiled sweetly. Ning Juma's heart skipped a beat, the heat in his heart coming out. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 75. Wei Bai's smile didn't change as she lowered her head to do her needlework. Then she heard the favorability notification. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 40. Wei Bai, Ning Shirsi is here again. She really wanted to poison him. Wei Bai thought brightly and sadly. Suddenly, her chin was lifted by a finger. She was at a loss for a moment. But she saw Ning Juma looking at her with burning eyes. He said in a low and hoarse voice, "Awei." Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of a smile. But very quickly, there was a trace of doubt in her eyes. Then she said, "Who exactly are you?" Ning Juma pursed his lips. She could actually see that he wasn't a fool. Wei Bai saw that he didn't answer. She anxiously picked up the scissors in the basket and said to him, "Are you a wandering ghost that has attached to my highness?" Ning Juma saw that her eyes were so cold, her expression murderous. His heart was filled with anger. It was suffocating. Even when she was in a daze, she actually thought that he was a wandering ghost. Ning Juma said in a huff, "I'm a wandering ghost? You're blind. If there really is a wandering ghost, it's that fool." When he thought of how stupid he was, Ning Juma felt sullen and embarrassed. He felt like he was looking at his own dark history every day. He couldn't wait to bury his stupid self alive. Wei Bai's eyes trembled when she heard his words. She didn't dare to believe it. He's a wandering ghost. When Ning Juma saw her like this, he almost wanted to lie to her maliciously. That's right. Everyone has 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. That fool will become a fool if he loses some of his spiritual and physical souls. He must have become like this because he lost his spiritual and physical souls when he possessed someone. Wei trembled. Ning Juma viciously cursed her to lack a soul, okay? Her shocked expression made Ning Juma feel less stifled. He reached out his hand and gently touched his face. "This is my body, my face. That idiot His Highness is the wild ghost that has taken over my body. I have been oppressed and bullied by him for so many years. Why can't I find my own body?" In the end, he was about to believe his nonsense. His tea. He resented himself for being stupid. Wei Bai held the scissors with a strange expression. The scissors in her hand trembled. Suddenly she asked softly, "Is he still here?" Ning Juma frowned. "What? Wei Bai, is the ghost in your body still here?" Her voice was heavy, with a sense of sadness and depression. Ning Juma stared at her silently for a while, then suddenly said mockingly, "Why, you don't like that fool, right? So what if he's not here?" Chapter 1584. Wei Bai's eyes were filled with tears. She seemed to be blinking helplessly, trying to force back the tears in her eyes. This pitiful and cute look. It made Ning Juma feel that there was no point in bullying her. And he had been a fool for too long. He actually made up such nonsense to fool people. He was getting more and more childish. Ning Jioma was about to tell the truth, but he saw the scissors in Wei Wei Bai's hand turn around and stab her own neck. Ning Jiuma's pupils constricted. He immediately pounced over and grabbed her hands tightly. He knew that she was very strong. If he didn't use all his strength, he couldn't stop her at all. What are you doing? Ning Jiuma felt that she was crazy. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were still misty, but her eyes were unusually cold. He's a ghost. I'm just going to accompany him as a ghost. Her words were soft, but her tone was too harsh. Ning Jiuma had just spat out a mouthful of malice, but he was choked back by her behavior. She was too strong. Even if he used all his strength, the scissors were still stabbing her neck bit by bit. She wasn't joking. She really wanted to kill him. Ning Jiuma stared at her for a while. Suddenly, he became fierce and wanted to snatch the scissors from her hand. He really couldn't say that the fool was also him. He had just teased her, and now he was begging for mercy. He was too cowardly. Ning Jiuma held back his pride and tried to snatch her scissors with all his might. But Wei Wei Bai refused to let go. She still moved the scissors bit by bit, and the sharp part of the scissors touched her own neck. It was about to leave a bloody mark on her slender and fragile neck. Ning Jiuma's voice trembled. He's still here. He hasn't dissipated. Wei Wei Bai's fingers weakened. Ning Jiuma's eyes turned sharp. He took the opportunity to snatch the scissors. Then he threw the scissors out of the door. Wei Wei Bai's hands were empty as Ning Jiuma held them. Her eyes reddened as she asked in disbelief, "Aren't you awake?" The corner of Ning Jiuma's mouth twitched. She actually believed that he was a wandering ghost when he was in a daze? Who would believe such lies? Had she been hit in the head by a door? Or was he a country bumpkin who entered the palace? Was his brain so simple? Ning Jiuma was really afraid of her behavior. He gritted his teeth and said, "Very good. He comes out in the day to snatch my body, little fool." Even when he felt that he was stupid, he was not as stupid as this little fool. She had been fooled by him. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before saying strangely, "Why do I feel like you're the wandering ghost? Which wandering ghost would come out in the day?" Ning Jiuma, can't we get over this idiotic topic of wandering ghosts? Wei Wei Bai didn't insist on an answer. Instead, she used all her strength to pull her hands back from his, and then her voice softened. "Then don't hurt him." Her current appearance did not have the slightest bit of the ferocious look from before. She was clearly delicate and weak, but he didn't know where she got her strength from. Ning Jiuma's eyes darkened. "You like that fool so much?" Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes. When she heard his question, her fair face suddenly turned red, and she looked as beautiful as a begonia flower. She snorted coldly, "He's my husband." Ning Jiuma was holding her hand, but now it was empty. He bent his fingers and his eyes darkened. "Husband. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. / transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here." You can see it the next time you open the bookshelf. Chapter 1585. Suddenly, what happened in the secret room that day flashed through his mind. Her back was as beautiful as a plate, and her weak body was as soft as a willow, clinging to him without letting go. After that day, she softly whispered 2 words into his ear. Husband. How was she worthy? Even if he had fallen to this point, he wouldn't have to marry a palace maid as his first wife. Wei Wei Bai turned around in annoyance and picked up the unfinished needlework. My mother said that a girl has to be faithful to her husband. He is the husband I want. Ning Jiuma was silent. The candlelight flickered. Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to give him a good look, and continued to sew the clothes. These were the clothes she made for him. The brand new fabric was something that she had gotten from her aunt, who was in charge of fabric, with a sweet smile on her face. In this cold and detached palace, when the cold wind blew, the windows would creak. But when did the candlelight here become so warm? The tables and chairs were so clean. The mattress was also like this, soft and comfortable. Even he was as clean and comfortable as these things. His long hair wasn't dirty at all. It was the same flower-scented shampoo that she used to wash her hair. So the two of them smelled very similar. She felt that he wasn't that fool. so when she sewed the clothes, she didn't even look at him. Sitting by the light, she lowered her eyes slightly, revealing her snow-white neck. Her slender fingers held the needle beautifully, sewing a man's clothes line by line. Ning Jiuma sat at the side, his anxious heart calming down. His life had been full of ups and downs, but he had never had such a warm moment. She was good to him. No matter how vicious his heart was, he knew. But this kind of good was when he was stupid. So when he thought of her when he was sober, there was always a hazy veil between them. In the end, there was still a layer. But now he felt it very emotionally. Unfamiliar and strange. Not bad. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 45. Wei Wei Bai said to the system. In the end, he is still a person. Once my mother gets up, even if he is smart, his favorability will still increase. Ning Jiuma saw that she thought of something and suddenly smiled, gentle and charming. He was stunned for a while, then thought that she was good to him. But it was because he was a fool. The tranquility in his heart was chased away by frustration. He smiled coldly. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 40. By Wei Wei. It's still better for idiot Ning. I'll still use poison BA. The system cut the red. The reason he is not drooling now. If the poison was deep enough then. Was. Ning. The two of them sat down. Ning Jiuma stared at her. His relaxed gaze gradually darkened and finally turned cold. She didn't even look at him. He was not looking at her either. Ning Jiuma turned around and walked to the window, opening it. The eunuch squatted under the window and said softly, Your Highness, the Empress has started to deal with you. You have to be careful these few days. The Empress will probably find a reason to throw you into prison. Ning Jiuma's eyes were dark. He suddenly said, louder. The eunuch was stunned, but he still raised his voice. Ning Jiuma's back was facing Wei Wei Bai, and he revealed a scheming smile. Chapter 1586. Then he said, The Empress wants to kill me. Even if I escape thousands of miles away, I can't escape from her. I can only fight to the death with her. The eunuch was stunned. Why did he feel that His Highness was being silly? Of course, they could only fight to the death with the Empress. But His Highness had always been tolerant and cold. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was all about various plans. His Highness's words seemed to be directed at someone. The eunuch immediately reacted and said to the little palace maid. He immediately nodded and said to his master, Your Highness, we can't escape. And you're not in good health. If you leave the palace, you'll definitely die. When he said that he would definitely die, suddenly, there was a cry of alarm from behind. It was Wei Wei Bai's voice. Ning Jiuma immediately returned to his senses, afraid that something would happen to her. But he saw Wei Wei Bai frowning and staring at her finger. There was blood on it. It was pricked by a needle. She glared at him fiercely, then lowered her head and sucked the blood into her mouth. Her moist lips were like the softest petals, holding the blood. It was such a simple action. But Ning Jiuma couldn't return to his senses for a long time. The eunuch behind him didn't understand and shouted, Your Highness. Ning Jiuma was shocked and immediately returned to his senses, suppressing his unstable breathing. He put his hand on the window and said in a low voice, Get lost. The eunuch immediately saw that something was wrong. He didn't dare to say anything, let alone say anything. After the poison was successful, the Empress went crazy and smashed things. Now she was venting her anger on everyone. She was so angry that she didn't even want to let Ning Jiuma off. The Empress didn't care who made the crown prince crazy. She just wanted to vent her anger, so anyone could become a ghost under her feet. And Ning Jiuma's people were waiting calmly, waiting until she couldn't take it anymore. Take out the antidote. His son was driven crazy. If there was an antidote, he would definitely take it out. The Empress only had one son, the crown prince. Without him, the rest of her life would be over. Could she rely on her family for a lifetime? Rely on her son's talent? The harem was such a cruel place. The eunuch thought of the little palace made by Prince Ning's side. She was small and weak. She smiled sweetly, which softened everyone's heart. How could Ning Wang not be moved when they were together day and night? The eunuch immediately suppressed this thought, and guessed King Ning's thoughts so casually. Was he courting death? The eunuch immediately scampered away in fear and trepidation. not daring to look back even half a glance. Ning Jiuma closed the window, and his breathing finally stabilized. But when he looked up, he saw that Wei Bai was already standing in front of him. Her eyes were filled with worry. "The Empress wants to kill you?" Ning Jiuma smiled coldly. "Didn't you hear it?" He wanted her to hear him on purpose. He wanted her to know how difficult her situation was. As expected, Wei Bai became anxious. "Can't we escape?" "Escape with me. I know the cold palace." Ning Jiuma glanced at her indifferently. His voice was deep and cold. "No, I'm a prince. I'll be caught no matter where I go. I can't escape. Escaping means death." Wei Bai stopped breathing, and her face turned pale. "If you die," Ning Jiuma deliberately slowed down his tone. "If I die, those wandering ghosts will have no body and their souls will scatter." Wei Bai's lips trembled. Her face was pale. "Then you can't die." Ning Jiuma's lips curled up, revealing a smug smile. He was really addicted to bullying her. "If I don't want to die, there's only one way. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like." Chapter 1587. Wei Bai asked curiously, "What method?" Ning Jiuma lowered his voice. "Fight. Fight." Ning Jiuma also wanted to be the Empress? Wei Bai hurriedly drove the side mission out of her mind. Ning Jiuma said, "I need to become the crown prince. That way, no one can kill me, including that fool you like." Wei Bai bit her lip. Under the light, her big eyes were a little dazed. To her, being the crown prince might be a very distant identity. She was just a little palace maid who had just entered the palace. Ning Jiuma's heart softened. "You don't want your fool to be bullied all the time, right?" Wei Bai's eyes sharpened. "I will protect him." Ning Jiuma sneered. "Oh how? The Empress wants to kill me now, which is equivalent to killing him. What's the use of your identity?" Wei Bai's face turned pale, but she couldn't refute. Ning Jiuma's voice softened. "It's like this here. If I become the crown prince in the future and my body recovers, that fool of yours might be able to come out. I will have someone do a ritual to let him possess a dead person, and let him come back to life, so that he can fly together with you." Wei Bai's eyes lit up as if there were stars in them. She revealed a surprised smile. "Really?" Ning Jiuma paused for a moment before saying slowly, "Yes, really. I'm really lying to you." Wei Bai immediately suppressed her smile. "I won't ask for much. It's fine as long as he's still here. How do you want me to help you?" Why was she so gullible? No wonder she liked him when he was a fool. She was a fool too. A little fool and a big fool, a match made in heaven. Ning Jiuma suppressed this absurd thought and immediately said, "He has occupied my body for a long time, but he's a fool. He can't make me the crown prince. The crown prince can't be a fool." Wei Bai nodded in agreement. "Yes, what you said makes sense." She nodded like a chick pecking at rice, and her soft eyes. This made Ning Jiuma's male self-esteem inflate. He was so outstanding that the little palace maid began to worship him. Ning Jiuma put his hand on her shoulder and said encouragingly, "So you have to teach a fool to become a crown prince, and let him pretend to be a normal person." Wei Bai rolled her eyes, grabbed his hand and flung it away. She then wiped her fingers with a handkerchief in disdain. "Then promise me, when you become the crown prince, you will return my highness." Ning Jiuma, how good is he when he's silly? How good is he? He was such an outstanding and intelligent man. But she liked him when he was silly. It was not wrong to say that she was stupid. Ning Jiuma snorted coldly. "Do you think everyone is like you loving that fool?" Wei Bai put her hands on her hips and said, "I like it. You're jealous." Ning Jiuma's mouth was blocked by her, and he was furious. "I'm jealous. You two are a fool and don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You two are a match made in heaven. Don't harm others." Wei Bai sneered. "I think you're the lonely ghost who can only come out at night. If you're not a ghost, then what are you?" Ning Jiuma said. "Besides, I'll make that fool's soul disappear." Wei Bai immediately covered her mouth and puffed it up like a live frog. Ning Jiuma finally reacted. He had actually lowered himself to the point of bickering with the palace maid. And it was so childish. He always planned to take the throne, drive the crown prince crazy, and kill the empress, manage the court and train the army. But in the end, He was so stupid to argue with Wei Wei Bai about such a childish thing. Chapter 1588. Ning Juma's face turned black and white. He felt that when he was sober, he was no different from a fool. He flung his sleeves and climbed onto the bed angrily. With his back facing Wei Wei Bai, he glared fiercely at the bed curtain, as though he wanted to bore a hole through it. Wei Wei Bai didn't talk to him anymore. She packed up her needles and folded her clothes. Then, she blew out a few candles and took out a blanket. She placed it on the small bed and climbed onto it to sleep. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, Ning Juma always has a favorability of 40. I miss my 75. The system looked at the red line. It was cut halfway and thickened again. This red line would cause the side mission to malfunction. It had to be cut. The chainsaw kept cutting. The system took out a stone drill. Wait, diamonds? The system thought. How many life points could it sell? Then it started to buckle the diamonds. It's okay. Without the antidote, he will come back at 75. The poison acted up repeatedly. Without the antidote, Ning Juma couldn't really be normal. Wei Wei Bai was comforted. She didn't need to dump Ning Shirsi. As long as idiot Ning came out, she could just do her best to win him over. Wei Wei Bai was sleepy again. She closed her eyes to sleep. The lone lamp flickered. In the darkness, a hand was holding a handkerchief with a bewitching scent. Just as it was about to cover her mouth and nose, Bai Weiwei opened her eyes warily and firmly clasped his hand. Ning Juma gasped, and the handkerchief in his hand fell to the ground. Weiwei Bai flipped over and got up. Her eyes were bright and clear. What are you doing? Ning Juma was shocked. He pursed his lips awkwardly, but didn't want her to find out. He couldn't sleep, and could only hug her to sleep. It was such a cowardly thing. Ning Juma was speechless. Weiwei Bai frowned, and was about to say something. Ning Juma suddenly squatted down and hugged her slender waist. He said aggrievedly, Away, why aren't you on the bed? I'm having nightmares. Weiwei Bai looked at the mentally retarded version of Ning Juma. Stop pretending, big brother. The favorable impression points have betrayed you. Weiwei Bai was silent for a while before reaching out to gently stroke his hair. Your Highness, you're awake. These words seemed to have a double meaning. Ning Juma also reacted. The one in her mouth had woken up. The fool she liked was back. Ning Juma had already played dumb, so he could only play dumb to the end. If he was exposed, he would lose face. Hence, Ning Juma did not complain and rubbed against her thigh. The faint fragrance on her body made his body stiffen. Weiwei Bai's hand also changed from probing to a gentle touch. Your Highness, I will protect you, she said softly. She had said this before. But this time the weight was heavier than ever. If he was stupid, he probably wouldn't even understand what she was saying. But he was awake, and could hear the trembling in her voice. She knew fear too. He thought she was reckless and lawless. Ning Juma smiled disdainfully. He was afraid that she would contradict him again. If she didn't hug his thigh, she would regret it in the future. Weiwei Bai said lightly, Okay, Your Highness, let's go to bed. A simple sentence as pure as water. Ning Juma was stunned for a while before nodding blankly and letting her lead him to bed. Weiwei Bai covered him with a blanket, combed his hair, and gently pressed his eyes with her soft fingers. Sleep, I'm here. Her gentle murmur and her lowered face gave off a warm and gentle feeling in the dim light. Chapter 1589. Ning Juma's breathing stopped for a moment. He suddenly opened his eyes and pretended to be in a daze. Weiwei Bai also lay down quietly, leaning on his arm and closing her eyes. Not long after, she fell asleep without any warning. Ning Juma stared at the top of the bed, before daring to turn his head and look at her. He couldn't help but reach out and pinch the tip of her nose. Why are you leaning over when you're a fool? I really don't know what you're thinking. If I'm really a fool, you'll suffer in the future. Marrying a fool as a husband? How could a woman be happy? Ning Juma's body stiffened when he thought of this. What was he thinking? What husband? He was infected by Weiwei Bai's stupidity. Ning Juma immediately retracted his hand, pulled the blanket, and went to sleep. But not long after, he popped his head out from under the blanket and carefully pulled the blanket up a little, covering her with it. She said she would protect him, but she couldn't even take care of herself. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 45. When he woke up the next day, Fu Ning was back. He looked at Wei Wei Bai in a daze, and found that she was looking at him. The two of them looked at each other in a daze. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai leaned over and kissed him heavily on the cheek. "You're awake, Your Highness." Ning Juma's face turned red. When the red reached his ears, he obediently said, "N." Wei Wei Bai was in a good mood, because the favorability was at 75. What a beautiful number. Wei Wei Bai energetically ran to get food and charcoal, but on the way, she met the old emperor's sedan. Wei Wei Bai was so scared that she could only hide in the corner for a while under the system's reminder. She finally saw through the system's products. The quality was so good that it was scary, so she didn't want to become the old emperor's true love at all. The system saw that she was so disgusted and couldn't help but remind her. The mission is only to be the empress. It doesn't specify who the emperor is. Wei Wei Bai. I also wanted Ning Juma to be the emperor, but the time is too short. I said a lifetime, but the main mission is 1 year, so I only have 1 year. The time of the main mission was the right time for her to complete the mission. Wei Wei Bai treated the so-called lifetime as the main system taking liberties with her. But now a few months had passed since the strategy was released. With so little time left, even a rebellion wouldn't happen so quickly. Wei Wei Bai. If Ning Juma wants to be promoted, it will take at least 2 or 3 years. This was only possible if he was a genius and had extremely good luck. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai felt that it would be easy to trick the old emperor into letting her be the empress for a day. After all, she had the prize of the emperor's beloved. She couldn't be bothered to go through all that trouble, so she decided to lie to him as much as she could. If the old emperor really wanted to do something to her, she would smash his head with her staff and let him know what it meant to be castrated. As for the failure of the side mission, anyway, it's not like I'll die from the incision. I'll just have to bear with it. Wei Wei Bai, who knew nothing about the pain of cutting the retractable. The system did not know why, but it suddenly felt a chill in its crotch. Wei Wei Bai carried the food and walked to the door when she heard the system's reminder. There are many servants inside. The old emperor just came over and ordered people to clean up here and serve the male lead. Wei Wei Bai. The old emperor suddenly found his conscience. The system flipped through the latest information and told her that the old emperor's health was failing and that he favored a Taoist alchemist. And the Taoist with the highest status was the most favored one. He was Ning Juma's man. The Taoist told the emperor that if he wanted to live forever, he had to find an auspicious person in his life. With this person by his side, everything would go smoothly. To facilitate your next reading, you can click the button. Chapter 1590. With so many people saying so, the old emperor believed it. And all the traces showed that Ning Juma was very likely to be that auspicious sign. So the old emperor happily came to see his auspicious sign early in the morning. Wei Wei Bai said, "Why are there Ning Juma's people everywhere?" The system didn't say it, but it was clear now. Whether it was the imperial court or the palace, who knew how many of Ning Juma's people had infiltrated? The system said, "Money." Wei Wei Bai understood. That house of wealth, Ning Juma's cold temperament, and his means of controlling people's hearts. After so many years of planning, it wasn't impossible to run a force. Wei Wei Bai walked in calmly. 2 eunuchs were sweeping the door. A few palace maids were holding clothes and seemed to be chasing someone. They were making a lot of noise. "Your Highness, please change your clothes, please change your clothes." Ning Juma panicked and avoided the hands of these demons. His face was pale with fright. Suddenly, he saw Wei Wei Bai at the door and his eyes turned red. He immediately rushed over and hid behind Wei Wei Bai. He said in a trembling voice, "Wei, they want to bully me." When the palace maids saw Wei Wei Bai, they immediately stopped and said stubbornly, "We were sent by His Majesty to serve you. You can move aside." Wei Wei Bai looked at them coldly. Then she looked down at the clothes in their hands. The clothes were brand new. They were the regular clothes of a prince. The stone green robe with dragon patterns on the edges looked very good. But whether it was the clothes or the palace maids, to Ning Jiuma they made him afraid. These strangers suddenly broke into his and Wei's house and took over this place without any scruples. They even tried to pull him away. Ning Jiuma shrank behind Wei Bai. He hugged her and didn't let go. He felt safe at once. It was like a young bird returning to its nest. Wei Bai looked at the arrogant palace maids and reached out to touch the back of Ning Jiuma's hand on her waist. He seemed to be comforting her. She was calm and collected. Sisters, Prince Ning's body is weak. You've scared him. The palace maids were also people who fawned over those in power. It was already depressing enough for them to be sent to this cold palace with no future. Moreover, Prince Ning was a fool, even though he was currently an auspicious sign. However, if the emperor were to send them away again one day, they would also be implicated. Every single one of them had a bright future ahead of them, but they ended up here. Naturally, their tempers would not be good. Moreover, with Prince Ning's character, even if these people bullied him, they would not be able to do anything to him. He wouldn't complain either. The palace maid sneered. Your Majesty, you asked us to serve His Highness King Ning. You are just a little palace maid. How dare you be presumptuous in front of us? Someone take her away and slap her. Wake her up. Ning Jiuma tightened his grip on Wei Bai's fingers. He was tall and stood behind Wei Bai. When he raised his head coldly, his gaze was indescribably sinister and terrifying. Those palace maids trembled, as if they couldn't stand his insidious gaze. Wei Bai didn't notice Ning Jiuma's gaze behind her. Because the favorability didn't change, Ning Jiuma was definitely still that naive and sweet person who could only be bullied. Wei Bai sneered and suddenly said softly, Your Highness, these are your palace maids. Ning Jiuma's tone became serious. They are not. They are here to bully me. You are my only palace maid. His mind was muddled. However, he knew clearly who was bullying him. These people were here to bully him and Wei. Chapter 1591. Wei Bai nodded. But do you know? You can bully them back. Ning Jiuma's body trembled. He silently shrank behind her. They are scary, Wei. He was used to cowering. He had been cowering in the corner for so many years. He didn't know what resistance was. Wei Bai tilted her head and said weakly, But Your Highness, they want to bully me. Ning Jiuma's body stiffened, and he didn't say anything. Look, there are so many people. I can't resist, and will be dragged away by them. And in the future, they will take me away, and we won't be able to see each other. Ning Jiuma's fingers clutched her dress tightly. He said clumsily, Really? Really? He repeated in stubborn. Wei Bai nodded calmly. Really? If Your Highness can't protect me, I will disappear. Ning Jiuma immediately looked up. His eyes were red and fierce. Wei can't disappear. No one can take you away. I will fight with them. Wei Bai returned to her senses. She looked up and gently touched his face. Her eyes were soft. No, you don't have to fight with them. Come tell me. Ning Jiuma looked at her blankly, and then obediently replied, Okay. Wei Bai suddenly looked at the palace maids coldly and shouted, Impudent kneel. Ning Jiuma was stunned for a moment. His mouth moved. Wei Bai said, If Your Highness doesn't say it, I will be bullied. Ning Jiuma's heart tightened. He immediately looked at the palace maids. Impudent kneel. Once the childish and naive look on his face disappeared, the original dignified and oppressive aura was revealed. This impudent sentence was more oppressive and cold than Wei Bai's. The palace maids were servants and were used to kneeling. They thought they could be impudent in Ningguang Palace. But if Ningguang didn't indulge them, they were actually just servants. The palace maids looked at each other and knelt down shyly. After Prince Ning finished shouting, he was at a loss. He looked at Wei Bai helplessly. He didn't seem to know what to do. Wei Bai, you're so arrogant and rude. Slap yourself 50 times. Ning Jiuma didn't understand what she meant, but since Wei Bai said so, he started babbling. Arrogant, disrespectful behavior. 50 slaps to the face. There were some things that he had forgotten to say. After stuttering out the words, he looked at Wei Bai with some annoyance. Wei Bai smiled and said, You did very well, Your Highness. After saying that, Wei Bai turned around and said coldly, What are you waiting for? Slap her. The maids were speechless. Wei Wei Bai said, "You don't even listen to His Highness King Ning. As servants, how dare you disobey your superiors? You deserve to be beaten to death." The palace maids trembled and immediately slapped their own faces. Regardless of whether Prince Ning was a fool or not, he was now in the emperor's eyes. The emperor even came to personally send them to be Prince Ning's servants. If Prince Ning complained, then they would be ants under Prince Ning's feet. It was very possible that they would be beaten to death. The palace maids slapped their faces. Ning Juma looked at them blankly, as if he didn't understand why they would listen to him. Wei Wei Bai ignored the palace maids kneeling on the ground and picked up the stone-green robe. This was what a prince usually wore. There was also the formal attire of a prince. But today, the emperor only gave him regular attire. It seemed that he still had doubts about Ning Juma's auspicious appearance. Wei Wei Bai put the robe on Ning Juma and said softly, "Your Highness looks very good in this robe." Chapter 1592. Ning Juma looked down and saw that her fingers were holding on to the blue cloth. The girl's fingers were white and looked exceptionally clean against the dark cloth. He said softly, "It looks good." Awei's fingers looked much better. Wei Wei Bai said, "I'll help you change." Ning Juma blushed and nodded slowly. Okay. Whatever Awei said was good. Wei Wei Bai helped him put on his clothes and slowly buttoned up his shirt. Under her long eyelashes, her black eyes were serious and bright. Ning Juma looked at her in a daze for a while. He didn't know why, but he lowered his head and kissed her eyes. She blinked her eyes, and the kiss abruptly left. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in confusion. Ning Juma's mouth was dry and he said helplessly, "There's dust in your eyes." He lied again. And gradually, he knew that he could get what he wanted when he lied. Wei Wei Bai just smiled and looked at him dotingly. Then she said to him, "Your Highness, look." Ning Juma followed her gaze and saw that the faces of the palace maids were swollen. He was stunned. These were the people who bullied him. For the first time, the people who bullied him actually listened to him. Wei Wei Bai gently held his hand and said encouragingly, "You are a prince, Your Highness. There are very few people in this palace who can bully you. These palace maids are just paper tigers. As long as you have the right attitude, they can only kneel." She was slowly teaching a fool how to grasp power. She was serious and unreserved. So you have to know how to order them around. Make them kneel and listen to your orders. Let them know that you are the master. Ning Juma was a little scared. "I don't understand, Awei." The corners of Bai Weiwei's mouth lifted, revealing a gentle smile. "Your Highness, you don't understand. I am going to be bullied and even drowned in the well." Ning Juma's body stiffened. His lips trembled and he finally said, I understand, Awei. If Awei didn't leave and wasn't bullied, he knew everything. He learned everything. Wei Wei Bai said, "Your Highness, I will teach you. I will always be by your side, so you don't have to be afraid. Look at the Emperor and the Crown Prince. What they do, you do. How they scold you, you scold them." She did not expect a fool like Ning to be able to learn how to scheme in such a short time. However, he still had to teach him the basics. Ning Juma tugged at her sleeve nervously and nodded seriously. Just like a good student in the college entrance examination, he couldn't wait to immediately stuff everything the teacher taught into his mind. Then, Ning Juma suddenly walked to the side of those palace maids and kicked one of them out. "You're an eyesore. Get out." Wei Wei Bai. After kicking him, Ning Juma's eyes turned red again. He was a little afraid that he didn't do a good job. Awei, they are all like that. They were the Emperor Father and the Crown Prince. Wei Wei Bai. So in Ning Juma's eyes, the Emperor and the Crown Prince are just kicking people around every day. Wei Wei Bai could only applaud. "Not bad, you've learned well." Ning Juma immediately smiled. The uneasiness in his eyes swept away. Those palace maids and eunuchs were all in trouble. Ning Juma firmly remembered that Wei Wei Bai wanted him to learn how to behave like the Emperor and the Crown Prince. So his style changed. As long as a palace maid took a few steps forward, he would slap her. "Get out, you're too ugly." As long as a eunuch dared to enter the door, Ning Juma would cast a cold glance at him. Chapter 1593. If you step in here with your dirty feet again, I'll chop them off. The eunuch immediately left. From a little fool to a big bully in the Ning Palace. Just one sentence from Wei Bai, and she would be bullied. Ning Juma only had one obsession in his heart. Wei couldn't be bullied by others. Wei couldn't leave him either. So these people wanted to bully his Wei. He wanted to chase them all out. So he imitated the crown prince's bully look and the emperor's cold expression. He made those palace maids and eunuchs obedient. In the past they could bully Ning Wang because he had no power, and even the empress connived. Now the emperor came to see him personally. He even personally gave him a servant. If Ning Jiuma was a fool, it wouldn't matter if they didn't serve him well. But if Ning Jiuma was enlightened, then they would still be servants. Slaves were trampled on by others. Ning Jiuma followed beside Wei Bai. Wei Bai taught him how to face others word by word. His obedient appearance was especially likable. The more he looked at Wei, the more he felt that the Wei who scolded others coldly and taught him seriously. So cute. Wei Bai casually snatched a wooden staff from a palace maid, broke it, and threw it back. You used this to trip my feet. It's too soft. Go get a metal sword. Ning Jiuma suddenly became strong, making these domineering servants unable to be awe-inspiring. The eunuchs were still alright, but the palace maids weren't happy. Some even wanted to take revenge on Wei Bai. This palace maid was stupid enough to hold a wooden staff and pretend to trip her. She even did such a retarded thing. The palace maid was shocked by Wei Bai's strength. This was solid wood. Wei Bai looked at her coldly. Why? Looking at me like this, I will misunderstand that you also want to become this wooden staff. The palace maid immediately lowered her head and didn't dare to look. Wei Bai was done with her domineering behavior. She looked up and saw Ning Jiuma staring at her in a daze. He blinked and looked away. Wei Bai. Did Ning Jiuma get scared because she was too fierce? In the end, a notification sound rang out. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. Wei Bai. Although many people had appeared in the palace, Ning Jiuma was still unwilling to let others get close to them. He chased everyone out. Only Bai Wei and the two of them lived in the palace. The rest of the people had no choice but to live in small, dilapidated rooms. Because of the emperor's attention, the imperial kitchen didn't dare to prepare cold food for Ning Jiuma. Therefore, the food in the palace was much better. He lit the lamp and it was brightly lit. Bai Wei picked up the unfinished clothes and continued to sew them. Ning Jiuma was peeling a loquat. He removed the core and handed a piece to her. Wei Bai focused on making the clothes and sucked on his finger without thinking much. Her cold and sweet fingertips had the flesh of the loquat on them. Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and turned to look at him. She saw Ning Jiuma's deep eyes and indifferent expression. He retracted his hand as if nothing had happened. Then, he picked up a handkerchief and wiped his hand. You did well. This is your reward. Wei Bai suddenly spat out the fruit in her mouth. Ning Jiuma stopped wiping the handkerchief, and his indifferent expression twisted. This was too much of a disdain. She frowned. When you wake up in the future, don't get too close to me. We're not close. Ning Jiuma was still immersed in the image of her gently and seriously teaching him how to manage the servants in the palace. When he woke up just now, he saw her sitting by the lamp and sewing clothes for him. To TXT download. Chapter 1594. His heart softened. Just like the rain outside the window, it kept ringing. He couldn't help but stuff the loquat meat in his hand into her mouth. He even enjoyed the feeling of her lips and tongue around his finger. He didn't feel annoyed at serving others at all. In the end, he was despised. Ning Jiuma's expression turned cold. Not close. We've already done that and you're still not close? Wei Bai was confused for a while before she suddenly remembered something. Her face turned red, and she threw the clothes into the basket. You peeked. Ning Jiuma said. Do I need to peek? This is my body. I can look at it openly, right? Wei Bai was so angry that she was trembling. She suddenly reached out and pressed him down. She held the needle in her hand and pressed it against his eyelids. You didn't see it. You didn't. Ning Jiuma's eyelids were pressed against the needle, and his temperament instinctively turned cold. He said, Why? You can do it, but I can't stand it. If word of what you did with a fool gets out, you'll be drowned in a pig cage. Unmarried. It was an unusual disadvantage for a woman to begin with. Of course, Ning Jioma knew that she was doing it to save him, and even gave herself to him sincerely. After all, for a woman to sacrifice so much, she must have the intention to spend the rest of her life with him. Of course, she wanted to spend the rest of her life with him, when he was stupid, not when he was sober. Wei Wei Bai's face was red with anger. She said shyly and angrily, "Shut up, you bastard. Don't you know how to close your eyes? You have the face to see and talk about what happened between me and my husband. I'll blind you." Ning Jioma reached out and grabbed her wrist, wanting to push her away. But she didn't move. He didn't see her eat much. Why was she so strong? Or was his body too weak? Ning Jioma couldn't compete with her in terms of strength, and could only use his mouth. "Go ahead. If you're blind, then the fool is blind too." Wei Wei Bai's fingers kept trembling, and her eyes were red. In the end, she put away the needle and turned around. Despicable and shameless. Ning Jioma sat on the chair, his body a little weak. She kept referring to him as her husband. She had clearly said that to him. But when he woke up, she refused to acknowledge it. Ning Jioma didn't know why, but there was a sour feeling churning in his heart. He saw that she was going back to her little bed to sleep with the quilt in her arms. He didn't even look at him. It was as if he was invisible. She only smiled gently at the silly him. Every good thing was given to her by him when he was a fool. Ning Jioma even felt that his mind was splitting. He wondered if that silly person was really a lonely soul. How could she be so blind to recognize half of the same person? The more Ning Jioma thought about it, the darker and more ruthless his eyes became. He suddenly stood up and dropped a sachet from his sleeve. This was a new one. The drug inside could make people feel weak all over. It was used to deal with Wei Wei Bai. Where could he find a woman who was as strong as a cow? Wei Wei Bai had just spread out the quilt when she heard the system say, "The male lead is going to fight it out with you. He's coming for you." Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm. "He's as weak as a chicken. I can throw him out with one slap." It wasn't that she looked down on Ning Jioma, but everyone present. In front of infinite strength, they were all weak chickens. Wei Wei Bai had just stood up when one hand grabbed her waist, and the other covered her mouth and nose. When the sachet was pressed against her mouth and nose, Wei Wei Bai unknowingly inhaled a few breaths. Almost instinctively, she knocked back with her elbow. Is at https://www.sashu.com// Chapter 1595. She hit Ning Jima's abdomen. The man behind her groaned. His hand went limp, and the sachet fell to the ground. Wei Wei Bai stepped over the sachet and turned to grab his collar. Her expression was cold. "I've tolerated you for a long time. Don't give me a reason to kill you." Ning Jima's eyes were terrifyingly bright, and his expression was equally cold. "You're quite bold. You taught that fool not to condone people who offend his superiors. In the end, with your lowly status, you actually offended him knowingly." Wei Wei Bai said each word with a serious expression. "He's the only one on my side. Not you." So he wasn't worthy of her respect and love. Her eyes were so cold, and filled with an unfamiliar murderous intent. Ning Jioma held her wrist and gently moved it away. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Why didn't her hand have any strength? The medicine in the sachet took effect. Her body went limp and Ning Jioma pushed her to sit on the chair. Ning Jioma reached out expressionlessly and pulled at his collar. He was wearing a stone-colored prince robe. Golden dragon threads could be faintly seen on his wide sleeves. She had an air of elegance and nobility. This was a temperament that came from the crown prince's etiquette that he had once received. It was a temperament that came from his bones. Even after so many years, when he woke up, he was still as bright as the moon, jade, green pine, and white snow. Ning Jioma put one hand behind his back and said coldly, "He's your superior and I'm your superior. Don't forget, I'm the only one who can let him live. You want to run with him? Where can you run to?" Wei Wei Bai sat on the chair and didn't say a word. Ning Jioma didn't talk to her. Just looking at her made him angry. A woman who liked a fool was also a fool. If he looked at her a few more times, he He was afraid that he would be infected with a fool's disease. He said, "Tomorrow, I'll go to the imperial court as an auspicious sign. You better pray that I'll be able to stay awake. If I'm your fool, you'll probably be beheaded." The so-called auspicious sign was what the Taoist priest said. Tomorrow, when Jixing fell into the imperial palace, he would regain his consciousness and even his appearance. Ning Juma touched the scar on one side of his face. The potion had already been prepared. The scars on his face were all formed by a special potion. They looked uneven and abnormally terrifying. However, these disfigurement potions were actually good medicine for treating wounds. He knew that there should still be wounds on his face. But the wound was definitely not big. Therefore, regardless of whether it was the recovery of his mind or the recovery of his appearance, he already had the conditions ready. What he didn't say was that he didn't find the antidote. But after so many years of research and development, there was one drug that could suppress the toxicity. It was just that he couldn't take too much of this kind of medicine to suppress the poison, because if one ate too much, it would be like drinking poison to quench one's thirst. Those suppressed poisons would destroy his brain altogether. He would be even worse than he was now. At that time, she was the one who was happy. She couldn't wait for him to remain a fool. Ning Juma glared at her. To survive, tomorrow is the key. At that time, I will pretend to have amnesia. You will still be my palace maid. He would pretend to have amnesia. Otherwise, how could his good father be at ease and let him stay? After all, he was afraid of death. He remembered that Consort Ro had been killed, and his clansmen had been exterminated. Food had to be eaten one bite at a time. Deal with the crown prince, kill the empress, and finally the throne. This plan had been in place for many years. Once it was started, there was no possibility of turning back. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 1596. Wei Wei sneered and rolled her eyes at him. "You're so hypocritical. You only know how to lie all day. I hate men like you who are full of schemes the most." Ning Juma's smug expression froze. He turned back and looked at Wei Wei coldly. He saw her leaning against the chair. She looked cute, but her expression was infuriatingly cold. "You really know how to make things difficult for me. Without me scheming in fear, I don't know how many times I would have died." Wei Wei didn't have much sincerity. "As long as you're happy. Anyway, when I become the crown prince, I must release my husband." She really believed what he said. She was weak all over, but her head was still raised high. Her eyes were full of hope, and her face was as pink as a glutinous rice ball. It was as if she felt that her husband was a fool. He was a tumor that needed to be removed. Ning Juma suddenly flung his sleeves and walked forward. He lowered his head and looked into her eyes. "Do you care so much about him? Wei Wei, are you an old woman? I'm tired of always asking the same question. You can sleep now. If you don't sleep, you'll drag your body down." It was the time when she came and went and only knew how to care about him. She didn't even think about whether he was nervous or not. He was going to face a bunch of wolves, tigers, and leopards tomorrow. Ning Juma was nervous. Even his palms were sweaty. In this perilous palace, the moment he stepped out, he would be a target. But she was heartless and thought that he was a fool. They could be together forever. Ning Juma suddenly reached out and grabbed her limp body, lifting her up directly. Then he threw her onto the bed. Anyway, who didn't know about their relationship? Even if he was a fool, he still cared about her so much that they slept in the same room at night. Not to mention there was no filth. Others would think that she was the one in bed with him. That's right, she was. Ning Juma pressed her onto the bed. His black hair fell on her body, and his breathing was messy and heavy. Wei raised her hand, suddenly twisted his arm, and sat on top of him. "What are you doing?" She had already lost all of her strength, and this action had drained all of her strength. Ning Juma didn't know what he was going to do. He looked straight at her, and saw that her eyes were so clear that he could see the bottom. There was no color that was difficult to understand in the court. People like him wouldn't even know how they died. His cold eyes were filled with ferocious aggression, and his tone was no longer polite. "Go down." Wei sneered. "So be it. Who wants to sleep with you?" Her limbs were weak, and she struggled to move her body. When that soft body moved, it was like a fire, rubbing against his skin and creating a sea of fire. Ning Juma's body stiffened. However, Wei Wei Bai didn't even look at him, as she got off the bed with one foot. Just as her foot touched the ground, she was pressed back down by Ning Juma. Wei Wei Bai struggled away. She pushed him away weakly, grabbing and pinching him. "Get away from me. What are you doing?" Ning Juma was also sullen. He didn't say anything with a cold face, and he grabbed her hand tightly. It was as if he wanted to grab hold of something. The two people's breaths intertwined, and the ambiguous temperature slowly rose. Sweat dripped from Bai Weiwei's forehead, slid down to her chin, and then fell under that hidden white neck, leaving behind a trace of charm and gentleness. Ning Jioma was just angry that he wanted to subdue Wei Wei Bai. Chapter 1597. Burn, 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 and everything will be over. Damn it. This red line didn't just make it unable to walk properly. The side mission was stuck because of the existence of the red line. It didn't have enough memory. If it didn't break this thing, it would have to cut 100 times every time in the future. Would it still be able to live? Oh right. What did the host do to have a favorability of 55? The system thought for a moment. Sell her body. Sigh, the host had fallen. Back then, she was so pure that she had to haggle over how many favorability points to sell for her first kiss. Now, there didn't seem to be any difference from back then. After all, after selling her body, she still haggled over how many favorability points to sell. So its host was indeed as pure as ever from the beginning to the end. After the system finished its teasing, it continued to burn the red line. When it returned to reality, it would burn that fortune teller even if it risked being punished. What kind of material was it made of? It was so tough. The night passed and the morning light shone into the room. Ning Juma opened his eyes. There was a soft warmth in his arms. He lowered his head. Wei Wei Bai was curled up in his arms. His eyes softened, and he slowly reached out to stroke her cheek. He wasn't completely open to her, but he could trust her, because she was the person with the least ambition in the palace. Only people with no ambition would not be tainted. Ning Juma slowly got up and covered her with the blanket. He dressed himself in a set of stone-green robes and tied his hair with a jade crown. His movements were standard and smooth. How long had it been? Such a normal and natural process. He hadn't experienced it for many years. Ning Juma recalled the time when he was the crown prince. It was a beautiful period of time. With power in hand, it was extremely sweet. Ning Juma took out the medicine to suppress the poison. He opened the bottle and poured out one pill. The red pill rolled in the center of his fair palm. He looked at it coldly, and then swallowed it. A eunuch outside the door said respectfully, "Your Highness, Her Majesty requests an audience with you." Ning Juma's lips curled up coldly. His voice became timid and scared. I understand." It sounded like he was forcing himself to be calm, but when others heard it they knew. He was still that foolish King Ning. Ning Juma stood up and was about to leave. A puzzled voice suddenly came from behind. "Your Highness." Ning Juma paused, but he didn't turn back. Wei Wei Bai's voice seemed to tremble. Was it him yesterday? She thought he was the fool last night. So when he hugged her, she didn't resist and even took the initiative. It was so sweet that it seeped into one's bones. It was even more intoxicating than power. There was a reason why there were so many incapable rulers in history. Ning Juma's breathing paused for a while before he finally gritted his teeth and said, "It's your fault. I don't care about a woman like you. Just looking at you makes me want to grow a needle in my eye." Behind him, the sound of her breathing became soft and ragged. It was a relief of joy. Ning Juma snorted. "You better hope that I can succeed. If that fool wakes up, remember to ask him to pretend to be me." After saying that, he didn't look at her, and hurriedly walked to the door, as if he was afraid that he would waver. He had just stepped over the threshold. Wei Wei Bai's voice came from behind. "Your Highness, everything is going well." Such a rustic and useless way of encouraging. Did she think he was a 3-year-old child? Ning Juma couldn't help but look back, only to see Wei Wei Bai sitting on the bed with her long hair draped over her shoulders. She was wrapped in a blanket, revealing a pink face with a pure smile. Chapter 1598. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. Ning Juma's breathing quickened as he hurriedly turned around and left. It was as if there was a fox chasing after him. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 60. Ning Juma went out with a confused look on his face, as if he didn't know where he was going. A trace of darkness flashed in the eyes of the eunuch, who came to pick him up. He lowered his head and respectfully extended his hand. He helped Ning Juma into the palanquin. Ning Juma said to him in a low voice, "Zheng Mao, send our people to Xia Wei, and then bring her to me." He didn't want to bring her along, but he didn't know why. But when he went to the imperial court to recover his mind, and even his appearance, he actually wanted her to see him. Ning Juma didn't know why he would do such a superfluous thing. Zheng Mao, who was Ning Juma's confidant who squatted under the window every day, said in a low voice, "Yes, Your Highness." Ning Juma lowered his head and hid his cold eyes under a silly and confused expression. Then he got into the palanquin. In the imperial court, the emperor sat on the dragon chair tiredly, but his eyes were glowing with excitement. Heavenly Master Lin said that Ning Juma was very likely to be the benefactor for him to pursue immortality. The Heavenly Master had already set up an array formation in the imperial court. As long as Ning Juma entered the array formation, if he was the benefactor, he would be transformed into a new person. Then he would be reborn. All the hardships of the past would disappear, and he would become a completely new person. The Heavenly Master even said that Ning Juma would face so many disasters. It was all for him. Because the Emperor pursued immortality, which was against the heavens would punish him severely. And Ning Juma was his benefactor. So he bore the calamity of the Emperor and became a fool. When the Emperor heard this, he felt that it made sense. Originally, Ning Juma was very talented and intelligent, very similar to him. But later, Consort Ro was framed and died in the cold palace. And this intelligent son of his had also become stupid and disfigured. At that time, he was already pursuing immortality. So Ning Juma's theory of resisting misfortune was correct. If Ning Juma was really his benefactor, he would definitely need him on his path to immortality. Because Ning Juma could bear the calamity for him. The Emperor did not feel guilty at all because he was the Emperor. Everything in the world belonged to him. It was Ning Juma's good fortune to bear the disaster for him. Ning Juma alighted from the palanquin and slowly walked into the imperial court. In just a few days, the imperial court was transformed into a complex and absurd array. It was like an altar. None of the kneeling courtiers made a sound. After all, the emperor was muddle-headed. Most of them relied on flattery to get to the top. No matter how the emperor messed around, they would comply. His footsteps paused and his body shrank down. His shoulders collapsed, and he cowered in fear, looking like a fool. Ning Juma saw the emperor sitting on the throne and looking at him with a strange gentleness. "Mor, I summoned you here because I have something for you to do." Ning Juma looked at him blankly, as if trying to figure out who he was. His disfigured face looked even uglier after his hair was combed back. The emperor and some of the ministers averted their eyes in disgust. It was so ugly. Could he really be reborn? The eunuch beside the emperor said in a sharp voice, "The prince is here. Why aren't you kneeling down?" Ning Juma staggered and immediately knelt down. He didn't know what to say and just knelt and trembled. The emperor saw his silly appearance and was a little uninterested. He said to a middle-aged man dressed as a Taoist beside him, "Let's begin, Taoist master." To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the bookmark. Chapter 1599. Heavenly Master Lin nodded and flicked his fly whisk. He chanted a bunch of mysterious words, then reached out, and the array emitted a hazy white light. Everyone widened their eyes. How did this happen? Ning Juma, who was in the white light, suddenly twitched violently. He broke out in cold sweat, as if he was struggling with something. Heavenly Master Lin said coldly, "This is a rebirth. If he is really your Majesty's benefactor, then he will survive. If not, then he will die." This sentence was very cold. The emperor smiled happily and said, "I am very lucky to have Heavenly Master Lin." Heavenly Master Lin had a sly look in his eyes. Ning Juma, who was in the array, lowered his head and sneered. Wei Wei Bai was led by the eunuch, Zheng Yi, to the door of the imperial court and squatted there. She looked at the eunuch strangely. Why did you bring me here? Zheng Yi said, His Highness is out. We have to bring him back. Wei Wei Bai nodded and didn't say anything. The system was still broadcasting the scene of Ning Jioma and Heavenly Master Lin swindling the emperor. Why is it glowing? The system said. It's a special powder. A small flame can make it like this. Wei Wei Bai watched with relish. Ning Jiuma's shaking is quite artistic. The system said. It's not much different from the village dancing gods. Wei Wei Bai felt the same. It was just that the setting was better. In fact, she felt that Ning Jiuma's stupidity might be hereditary. Didn't you see the emperor's stupidity? They were all products of the same gene. Maybe Ning Jiuma shouldn't be looking for an antidote. He should be looking for a genetic disease. Finally, Ning Jiumo raised his head. Wei Wei Bai felt that this was a cliché TV series. She could guess the ending with one look. But for her, who was bored, it was good to pass the time. Now it was the climax. When Ning Jiumo raised his head, he became smarter and better looking. The system had already said that the scars on Ning Jiuma's face were not that scary. Therefore, Ning Jiuma would definitely make his skin better, so that the emperor would believe that the celestial master swindler was the real deal. Wei Wei Bai sighed. The emperor feels like a pitiful old man with dementia. He is being hypnotized by a high-quality liar. I feel like the emperor will be cheated until he goes bankrupt in the end. Although the emperor was not a good person, but the liar Ning Jiuma was even worse. He even lied to his own family. It was said that the pills that the Heavenly Master gave the emperor were all poisonous. If he ate too much, the emperor would not be far from death. Ning Jiuma was halfway through raising his head when the live broadcast was suddenly cut off. Wei Wei Bai was confused. What's wrong? After watching half of the series, even if he knew what was going to happen next, he would still feel uncomfortable. How could he have climaxed? The guy who climaxed didn't have a hook. The system immediately checked and fixed it. The live broadcast malfunctioned. The signal isn't very good. Let me fix it. Was it easy to unify? All she did every day was sewing and mending. Moreover, it couldn't say that it had short-circuited the live stream when it was burning the red line. As for that red thread, it had been burning for so long, yet it had only melted by half. There was also a portion that wasn't afraid of fire or knives at all. It was almost at its wit's end with this red thread. Once it was fixed, Wei Wei Bai couldn't see the scene in the imperial court. But soon, there was an uproar from the officials in the imperial court. Then there were congratulatory voices. It seemed that the emperor had found his benefactor. Wei Wei Bai was bored and squatted at the side with the eunuch. She couldn't see the ending and felt uncomfortable. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.